DJ PJ for the beats, much appreciated. Like how we're getting down right now. Feel like a DJ. Anyway, thank you everyone for coming back for the second half of Thriving in a House Divided, Pathways to Healing in a Polarized Society. So we want to do a quick recap if we could jump to the next slide. And so we had panels, so we had three panels. One was the Daily Conundrum. The second was how to educate on equity with anti-woke legislation looming, and how your dimensions of diversity impact how you come across essentially your personal messaging. We also had a glance at the illustrations and what that looks like. And then we just came back from our self-care sessions with meditation, yin yoga, and Zumba. We also gave you a chance to hopefully grab some vittles, hydrated a bit, and getting ready to start our afternoon sessions, which are psychology and safety, the misplaced hero, and lateral aggression. We'll also have an illustration reveal and another special announcement. So also want to let everyone know that give thanks to our sponsors, Allegheny Franciscan Ministries, Foundation for a Healthy St. Pete, Pinellas Community Foundation, Tampa Bay Equity Incubator, the City of St. Pete, Healthy Start, Juvenile Welfare Board, Freighter, and the Medical College of Wisconsin, and our very own Tampa Bay Rays. Also want to give a quick shout out to the St. Petersburg Free Clinic. They were also a supporter of ours, and Maureen and Brian Butler of Vistra Communications. So would like to jump into the Debbie Fund. If you can go back to the Debbie Fund, please. Back to that message right there. Just want to give a quick reminder. You can go back one to the Debbie Fund, please. Thank you very much. Just for everyone who may have come in and hadn't seen this, this is part of our special announcement is the Debbie Fund. This is a new fund that is at the Pinellas Community Foundation. It is supporting the Tampa Bay Equity Incubator. It's also supporting this conference, as well as general diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion work throughout the region. So your support, your donations help to move this process forward. And frankly, we try to do as much as we can that's free to the public. But of course, it does require funds and resources in order to do so. So please, 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 if you can, $1, a nickel, a dime, it all helps at pinellascf.org/Debbie Fund. So with that, we are going to jump into our next panel, Psychology and Safety, Creating and Maintaining Safe Workplaces and Communities, with our moderator, Sarah Lindenmuth. Sarah?
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a productive morning and are ready for another great session. We aim to have time at the end for some questions, but in the meantime, please feel free to submit them in the chat as we move along. Hellos and friendly words of support are welcome as well for the panelists. That's always welcome. Again, my name is Sarah Lindenmuth, and I'm the focus group lead at Inclusivity. And joining me this afternoon are Clarence Ng, Philip Laws, and Marcia Alvarado. Clarence is a mobility and transit-oriented development practice leader at Kimley Horn, who's focused on providing integrated multi-transportation and land use solutions to create better communities. He has brought transformative planning to life through award-winning placemaking, city center revitalizations, regenerative housing, transit villages and corridors, waterfront transformations, and innovative districts in US and abroad. So welcome. Philip Laws is CEO of Laws Consulting Group. He is an accomplished corporate leader with extensive experience working with the top Fortune 10 companies. He has held several global leadership roles, including Global DEI Senior Manager at Amazon, Starbucks Coffee Company, 2 Japanese pharmaceutical sales and marketing firms, and Mobil Oil Corporation. Welcome. And Marcia Alvarado is a structural engineer serving the structural market lead for WGI. Her portfolio of work includes new construction, renovation, restoration, and forensic engineering investigations and analyses. She serves as the JEDI, that's Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion lead, supporting WGI's leadership's mission to create an inclusive environment for employees nationwide. She created the Alvarado Experience as a further platform to impact and advocate for DEI. So welcome all. Thank you so much for being with us. Safety. This is a very, very important topic. It's embodied in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's at the second tier. Our title today is Psychological Safety, Creating and Maintaining Safe Workplaces and Communities. Why am I afraid to show up as my authentic self? So I want to start out and ask each of you to help unpack a piece of this. And if you'd like to share any aspects of the topic that are personally or professionally resonate with you, please do that as well. But first off, Philip, could you start us out and talk about the layers involved with psychological safety?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay? Am I off mute? Yeah, so when you think about psychological safety, you think about, specifically from a diversity, equity, inclusion standpoint, how do you feel comfortable in the environment that you're in? Too often, specifically if you come from a marginalized community or you are a minority in general, you are the first one or the very few of a many. So how do you feel comfortable in an environment that may not look like you, think like you? So what that means is that how do you navigate through that environment? How do you do that and continue to keep your authentic self? Well, for me, it's been easy because I understand who I am and whose I am. So I've been very vocal about the things that I say and the things that I do and been very intentional to do that. So in other words, not compromising my culture, my ethnicity, or anything else in regard to those particular environments. The data speaks to itself, right? That you look at, the more diverse the environment is, there's value in that. But if you're in a situation where you don't get a chance to express yourself one way or the other, the organization itself loses out and that individual becomes suppressed, and that creates a very uncomfortable situation. So I think that the value of having a psychologically safe environment, speaks to equity, speaks to being inclusive, speaks to being valued. When you don't have that, you have just the opposite.
Very true. Clarence, can you speak to the role of placemaking in creating and maintaining safe workplaces and communities?
Yes, it's interesting where I'm going to start back in the past. I think that oftentimes when we talk about diversity and multiculturalism, sometimes we think about speech. Speech hurts folks if not done correctly. And when I think about what I do is really sort of more placemaking. Placemaking doesn't really hurt. It really impacts not only individuals but communities. A quick little story is, and the reason why I do what I do is, I recall back when I was before being 6 years old or so, I grew up in the Chinatown in Montreal, Canada. And the square that I used to play in, called Dufferin Square, with the old wooden swings, probably the lead paint, the concrete, 36-inch concrete tunnels that were used for the jungle gyms, ended up becoming a federal building many years later. And so when we think about communities and think about what we do as individuals and how we impact communities, that's something that really has stuck with me over time. And I think that, again, no matter what business or practice we're in, the things that we do really do impact individuals as well as communities.
It's fascinating to see the overlap and the impact that early year experiences have on things like career path and decisions and your future feelings of safety. So Marcia, I want to pass it to you then to wrap up the third part of our topic, which is showing up as your authentic self. Can you touch on that, please?
Sure. Everybody can hear me okay? My Mickey Mouse ears? Awesome. Wonderful. Yeah, so I think as a structural engineer, being a female in a male-dominated industry has its challenges. And I think that one of the things that came out of me coming into my own from the high school years into my college years, really being able to understand who I was as an individual and what things are important to me. How do you translate that coming out of, maybe your family upbringing, maybe a suppressed family upbringing, going into the workforce? One of the things that I realized as being part of the LGBT community is that you have to really understand who you are before you come out, right, to the world, to your mom, to your dad, to the world around you. And trying to do that at work is even another layer. And so there's this soul searching that happens of finding your authentic self. What are the values? What are things that are important to me? What are things that are important to my family? What environment do I want to work in? Where do I thrive? What are my strengths? All of these things, I think, before you come out, you kind of have to really do some soul searching internally. And that has an advantage when you finally get there, right? And you're finally able to portray yourself. Then you have to find out what environment can people able to receive that information. You know, you and I served in leadership Tampa Bay. Like, that was an environment where I was really able to thrive and to be my true authentic self and have a lot of impact in my life. Going into the workforce as an engineer, I learned very early in my career in New York City that presentation and how I present myself to the world has weight. And so I used that to my advantage. I was very professional, and I always tried to provide a service, a good service where you can trust me, right? There's this level of human to human connection. How do I get you to connect with me? And being able to bring your authentic self is the best way you can connect with others. Because until you know who you are, you will never be able to understand others. And so that's been a really big, in the last 17 years of my career, I've always been able to find ways to connect with all types of human beings. And that's been kind of the godsend of what I try to teach others, is to empower themselves to know thyself before you can step out and do any kind of DE&I work, or try to give, motivation and encouragement to the teams around you, because it is contagious when you have that dynamic. When one person is authentic in that office, and then two people start having that sense of connectivity, others feel more inclined to step out and to share more about not necessarily their personal life, but be more true to the things that they love and that motivate them, so that we can put people in our workforce in places of success, right? Putting them on the right seats on the bus to make sure that they're happy, they're thriving, they're productive, they're making us money, right? So all of those things are important in the business segment.
All right. Well, thank you all for being vulnerable and sharing some of those personal stories. I know it's not your responsibility to do that, but it does have a lot of power when you get to the level of wanting to share that experience with others and translate that into powerful careers as well. So let's move on to the topic of workforce. There are some interesting things happening in the labor market today. According to the Department of Labor, the first 2 quarters of 2022 each marked productivity lows that date back to the 1940s. We've seen media narratives take this in a variety of directions, right? Identification of quiet quitting, kind of correlating it with that. Equal sources have taken this as a result of employees going back to the office full-time, or the opposite side of that, of staying home and not going. So we're pulled into a lot of different directions with various narratives. Do you believe that there's any connection between our topic today and this productivity trend, or are there other factors at play? I'll open that up to anyone.
Sure. I mean, think about it, right? So if we talk about psychological safety, if I'm in an environment that's hostile, if I'm in an environment that people don't respect or value me, and then I have an opportunity to, quite frankly, escape from that environment, why wouldn't I want to do that, right? So, or then you look at the technical side. If I feel like I'm technically competent and I can do this job at home and take care of my family, why wouldn't I do that, right? So, yeah, I think that has something to do with it. But I also think, too, that organizations got to look at it from a business standpoint. It's like we're paying all this rent for all these buildings and this real estate, and we need these people here. But when it comes to the bare essence of it, do you really need to be there? Some of these roles, specifically in a leadership role, they are controlling. They need to have that control over what you're doing, how you're doing it. I need to see you. The shift in paradigm is different now. People love freedom and independence to be able to do what they can do. You hired me for a reason, allow me to do that. Let me get the training that I need, and let me bring to your point, Marcia, authentic self to work. So yeah, I personally think it has something to do with that. And quite frankly, those organizations that's probably suffering the most probably could go back and look at the real and say, did we do our best job of keeping our employees happy, keeping them safe, keeping them free from discriminatory practices, from being oppressed, suppressed, or depressed. Yeah, I personally think that.
I think now the organizations have to now define who they are.
Mhm.
Now the eyes of the world, or the the institutions of the world that have to create a space, what this organization is really about. What is it that we want to be? What is our culture? Is our culture to be in the office? Or is it our culture to have half of our workforce working from home 50% of the time? Like, what does that dynamic look like? Because there's a lot of opportunity of different variations of the way you can work. And so, with WGI, we are an office culture where we want our people in the office, but we also want to create a space where they want to be there, right? Would you rather work from home and be in, four walls in your little office at home where you have to, kind of create remove your distractions? Or do you want to come into an office dynamic where you have a very collaborative space where we have 4 different types of engineers working on one project, and you can be more productive sitting around a round table cranking out engineering all day, right? So there's this, I think what it's doing is it's challenging the actual organizations to create that identity. And not every company is going to be the same. I think now there's a lot more opportunity to create flexible opportunities, but in some cultures, the staff that we have, a lot of them are coming to the office. Is there exceptions? Are we being human and recognizing hey, I have a sick newborn at home? Yes, we have opportunities to be that flexible, but we understand who we are. And I think that dynamic is forcing organizations to create the identity that they want. And the workforce will go where they want to be. If you don't want to be in an office every day, then maybe WGI may not be for you, right? There may be another substitute for that. And that's perfectly fine. I think I like the idea of having flexibility within our workforce.
Yeah, I agree with what Marcia just said. I think that, it's really interesting. I'll take it into sort of 2 directions. One's from an individual's perspective. I mean, at this point in time, I think everybody's trying to find what their new normal looks like, right? And so I think part of it is aligning yourself with either, whether it be a traditional type of environment, typical office, or where I'm seeing a big shift as folks want to do some non-traditional. The key is just, I think, trying to find the balance in between and creating those spaces where people feel as if there is a space for them however they wish. The interesting thing as a firm as well, a private consulting firm, I look back at what we've done as an organization, really sort of focusing back on our core purpose. And actually, this has been written in our company's sort of foundational document since the beginning, is really to provide an environment for our people to flourish. And I want to unpack that for a minute, because I think it's really important where, as the board of directors, we identified a strategy where we weren't going to necessarily focus on some of the negatives or the challenges per se on their own, because there is division. There's division in what people think and how they interpret what's happening and the changing in society. But we really went back and focused on the North Star, which is that core purpose, allowing our folks to flourish, and trying to really find the way to encourage more diversity, right? Helping folks find their space, creating an inclusive environment, and really have worked in and retooled some of our strategies, and honestly, maybe not even retooled, strengthened some of our strategies, including training, to really address that. I mean, I'll kind of highlight a few things, because, obviously a person of color in a otherwise, I mean, we actually ran the numbers not that long ago, and we're still, I think, about 70%, Caucasian, and also similar to Marcia, we're an engineering company, so more predominantly male. So it started for us at least, maybe 10 years ago, when we wanted to lean into what was the reason why we were losing a lot of women in the STEM to transition. So we really leaned in and created an initiative called Lift. And so that sort of process has really helped us when in this last, 5 years or so, that we've had a lot more of these conversations come to bear. And really all we did was really use those same strategies and have really sort of focused on how we can help, individuals flourish. And let me sort of touch upon a couple of them, and we'll probably get back to some other things later because I don't want to dominate this conversation either. But really, in terms of, one of the things, as again, I'm sure each one of you who are listening to this discussion, as we've been going through the different facets of our own lives, professionally growing and working with leaders, supervisors, and sometimes, yes, they're a little tone deaf, and we go back home and you're like, all right, what really happened? And we kind of muscle through it. I think we're at a point in our lives right now, in our society, where those conversations are no longer, I'm just going to grin and bear it. And really the key is how do we engage in it? So, I think as a company, what we've really done is starting to focus on and institute not only training for supervisors, managers, to talk about how do you develop others? What type of culture of people building are we really doing? And having that as part of an overall process where we can infuse that into the HR process, looking at how we are perhaps not seeking out qualified candidates in HBCUs and other institutions. So we've actively started doing that, looking at where's this unconscious bias in recruiting, retention, and even the recognition process. So I think those are some of the things that, at least as an organization, I'm really proud that we're really sort of focusing on and really emphasizing a culture of respect. I mean, I look around my office right now, again, there isn't as much diversity as I would like, but I think we're headed in the right direction. And I think that's really important, as part of this overall process.
Okay, great. There's one thing that I want to go back to. A lot of what all three of you described was very changes internally that are very visible, or should be very visible to current employees. How would a prospective employee get to know and explore what the culture of this company that they're prospecting to join, what that culture looks like?
Oh man, I want to field this one, but go ahead, Philip.
No,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll follow up. Go ahead.
I'm going to give you a personal experience. So I joined the organization 18 months ago, a little over 18 months ago. And I, as a future leader in the organization, really did my research, and I wanted to see what was available to me. I think I found out that the marketing and creative and the branding of the entire organization is all in-house, and that was very prominent. We have a podcast where we interview our associates. I listened to 6 different podcasts or 6 different leaders in the organization. The marketing and the branding that follows around those core values are something that I could see visually. I could experience, I could listen to someone speaking about their life and how they're sharing about their life and their job within the culture of WGI. I could watch it in videos on the website. There was all these opportunities, especially for someone, just turned 40. So I kind of consider myself on the cusp of millennial and Gen X, but, I claim the Gen X as far as I can take it. So the reality is, it's like, I'm looking at this from a perspective of what maybe our younger market is looking at. And if they don't have anything tangible to really experience before they show up, before they apply, then they really don't know what they're getting themselves into. And that, I think, is part of the identity, right? You have to create that. That's time and effort and resources that you have to spend that are overhead, right? And so unless you are investing in, and you don't have to be large, but someone has to be able to experience a life in WGI before they apply, right? When I came on, I started the Jedi Council, which is a grassroots organization of young people, leadership, all the way up to the president of the organization, working on our initiatives, building out what these platforms could look like. We're not at the point where we have like major ERGs, but that's because we're not there yet, right? We don't have that critical mass yet. we're doing it in a very inclusive environment where I have a Jedi Council that is representative of all the races and genders and disparity that we would see within different ERGs. And we're trying to look at it as a collective. Like we launched a national mentoring program within the organization, and we implemented pronouns in our signature, all the way to if someone applies to WGI, they have an option to put the pronoun in. And that shows a visible, tangible piece of evidence that we are thinking about these things. And if you don't have that, that's then like where you should start, is how to create small opportunities within your organizational business structure that will help someone visually experience.
Yeah. So for me, to me, it's not that complicated, especially as I have matriculated through, corporate America. If the people, I want to be a diverse organization, if the people in the leadership roles are not reflective of that, that's just exercise in futility. It's not that hard. You talk about a culture of trying to attract different people, different thoughts from a diverse standpoint. If the individuals that's in these decision-making roles are not reflective of that, I don't know how authentic that can be. You can put all the mission statements in the world up there, but it boils down to that, the hiring practices, and then how do you put guardrails for the messy middle? The further higher you are, the less you are impacting the front line at the end of the day. So how do you stay in tune with those individuals? I know at some point somebody said they're 70% there. Okay, what about the other 30%? How are you checking and adjusting for that? Because at the end of the day, change is inevitable. Growth is optional. And I'll say it again, change is inevitable. Growth is optional. We have a choice from a leadership standpoint, organizational standpoint, to say, we got to take a look at everything and how can we get the best of the best from an inclusive, from a diversity standpoint, from an equity standpoint. Is the board of directors reflective of the population that we serve or that we're trying to achieve? Those metrics there, people kick that can down the road all the time. It's like, how do we gain access? Whether you're Black, white, gay, straight, LGBTQ, Latino, Asian, is it reflective of what we want to see, So, I think that's the entry, I know you threw out HBCUs, and that is amazing. That's great, but that's well overdue. It's like, how do we get a seat at the table? I may not have the experience. You got a lot of people coming out of these academic institutions. They may not have experience, or they may not have internships. How do you create a pathway for them? By establishing mentorships, that's once they've crossed that threshold to get in the door. How do you make that an opportunity? And that's not a handout, that's a hand up, from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think what I wanted to sort of piggyback on some of this discussion would be, it really is a bottom up and top down approach. I think that and I am an owner of the company, and I'm proud to say that we've spent as an organization a lot of effort early on and recognizing it. And this is the first place I've worked at where 2 years ago, after what happened, we had a firm-wide call. And we have about 7,000 people. This was a firm-wide call and discussions, and that it really was just a start of that process of communicating, dialoguing, and that we do have D&I communities that have been started really in part to share information, have a dialogue, right? I agree with you, Philip, that when you go from the C-suite down, right, there's a little bit of disconnect. I think the other thing I would say that I'm really proud of as an organization, we're very flat as an organization. So that I know when I first started over 10 years ago, the chairman CEO saw me in a room, and he knew my name. And that blew me away a little bit, in that I don't usually expect that. And I quickly realized that's part of the culture. It's the culture of knowing individuals and spending that time. And we do have ERG groups, right? We have at least 3 right now, which is, Women in Kinley Horn, Pride Connect, Black Employees Network. We also have encouraged a lot of office D&I, so really getting the bottom up and kind of getting to the external portion of it. That's where, as an organization, we've really leaned in and really trying to help mentor and grow folks to these leadership positions. Like, again, I mentioned we noticed that we were losing so many women in the beginning, and we said, all right, how do we do this? How do we do this as an organization to really help them while they're inside get beyond that ceiling, right? And that included a series of benefits that we started to do in terms of home care. I mean, we have programs where we'll help, whether it be food, dry cleaning, or whatever those needs are. And we have a series of these initiatives that, like, so for instance, we have 2 holidays that you can decide whatever holiday you want, right? And that is part of the culture. We celebrate on our actually internal page different stories. And it's interesting, as part of the D&I, as part of that communication, we've noticed that the not only getting the information out, but we found out that when we started having posts and regular monthly posts that highlight our people, and they could talk about heritage, religion, religious observations, cultures, cultural traditions, abilities, and military. We celebrated everything. And the amount of feedback that we got internally that was, internal and external, I think was amazing. I mean, I am proud. And again, this is one of those moments where before joining the company, we're all seasoned individuals here. And sometimes when I hear these things, I think, oh, it's being smoke blown up my rear. And I'm like, all right, this is just good marketing. But I realize now that it's about not only putting the message there, but actually doing it. And so I'm proud to say that, and we've been a Fortune 100 firm company for like 15 years. And so I again, blows me away. And I'm not just sort of touting it for pride reasons, but it's really about putting the money where your mouth is, because I put a lot more emphasis or value in being whatever number 22 this year. And because when I look at the other companies around us, whether it be a Marriott or some of these Googles or whatever they may be, what I pride myself even more so on is that we as individuals representing the company and doing what we do, we're visible, we're out there, and that award is actually based on survey responses, anonymous survey responses from employees.
Yeah.
So it's again, I think it's about talking the talk, walking the walk. And I agree with you. It's not, it's not a slam dunk, right? Yeah. It's working every single day at this, all these efforts to make sure that everybody's included and the voices are heard, despite the noise and everything else that happens in our country.
Yeah, so Clarence, I appreciate that. And again, it's not, and when I speak, I'm speaking in general, not for one individual organization. So for me personally, that's table stakes. All the benefits and everything that you indicated, to me, that's like table stakes, right? And you're right, when you look at top bottom, CEOs, they make a lot of money. You look at the people that started the organization from a profitability standpoint. I'm talking about those individuals that don't have a voice, those individuals that's in the shadows, those individuals that may be cleaning up that building that you're in. Are they being treated fair? Do they have health care for their children? Those people that have to take the early bus to get to those buildings, those people that may not have a place to go after that, or if they're in an environment from a psychological safety standpoint that they got to put up with it because they need the income to take care of their families. I think that there is a lot of opportunity to do not only just surveys, to get even deeper, to get granular in what people are doing. And I get it, ERGs is one thing, but do they have influence? Do they have power to make a difference, right? To be meeting is a waste of time. How proactive are we going to be about making change? Like I said earlier, at the end of the day, change is evident. Things are changing all the time. Growth is optional. Growth in the individual, growth in the organization, and what they want to do. So I'm certainly respectful, and I appreciate everything you said about your organization, as well as you, Marcia. I'm just talking in general. You start looking at the culture that we're in now, because we're dealing with young people that's coming out, and I love the fact that they want to be entrepreneurs. You know what I mean? They want to do their own thing. You know, they want to come in, you know, with their faded jeans and shorts on, and I love that creativity. But you know, for those other people,
It's a good thing we're on Zoom right now, so you don't see what color my pants are.
That's what I'm talking about.
Or,
you didn't go to an interview like that, but that's what I'm talking about. So you know what I mean? I think that's the beauty of diversity, you know, and that piece. So I'll pause there, and I don't want to dominate the call, but again, I appreciate that, Clarence.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and add something. I mean, that's kind of where I started in sort of my intro. What I ended up doing in my life was a response to where I started, and you know, having experience. I mean, I rode transit for the first 16 years, 17 years of my life until our family got a car, right? And so I understand what it feels like to live in a place where I wouldn't say you consider second class, because I never thought of it that way when I was in it. But when you think back as a professional, I think each one of us, depending what we do, has that impact. I mean, one of the things I do these days, really, so I like, for instance, on my transit practice, oftentimes when we start planning transportation and transit, it's, well, nobody rides the bus. Only those who are poor, destitute, or you know, can't afford a car are the ones who ride the bus. They are always considered a second-class citizen. So getting to your point, Philip, of what do we do to really help? And so it's interesting, because when I start, I've worked in Miami, we're in Tampa and other places where when we start talking about these fundamental investments, and I'll use that word investment because it really comes down to where do we put our dollars, where do we put our efforts? And when we start thinking about that, well, what is the day-to-day, you know, needs of individuals, right? Housing, transportation, and then when we talk about transportation, it becomes sort of a second thought. And so when we start talking about it and about the equity of those investments, and because that drives where people live, right? And so I think part of this conversation of equity, of diversity, is really trying to provide opportunities for all. And that goes for whether it be financing, right? Being able to get loans, you know, redlining and all that was I mean, it's still very difficult. You know, generational wealth is still in real estate, right? And transference of that wealth. So I think that when we start talking about how do we do this, I think we really need to think of not necessarily completely upending systems, but how do we provide opportunities, right? Where people can have, whether it be information, right? That's a start of it. But then the helping hand of walking through those processes. So when I think about, I'll wrap this up and sort of saying, but when I think about like transit and transportation investments, right? As a community, we need to invest in that. We need to say, all right, yes, I have my car, right? And I can drive on the road that's being paid for, you know, through my taxes. But how can I help raise, you know, again, the rising water, raise all boats, provide, you know, pay that 1 cent sales tax that's being voted on that may not pass, and all that stuff, so that we can provide better opportunities, not only for those who are here now who don't have it, but you know, our kids, are, you know, elderly who need that mobility, right? And so thinking about that, how do we really help folks and just broaden our conversation, I think is fundamental to this change, you know, Phil, that you're talking about.
I want to jump in here. I appreciate you taking the conversation in this direction, because you actually beat me to the next question, which was, we're talking about safety, and that extends beyond the workplace. It extends into communities and how planners and developers, their responsibility and their part in establishing safe communities. It's not just, the onus is not just on the workforce. So thank you for covering that. I do want to move on to our last section, and you have touched on a few examples here, but essentially a recent article in the publication Talent Development headlined the following: research shows leaders underestimate how much employees are struggling physically, mentally, socially, and financially financially. The underlying study identified significant gaps between C-suite perception and employee reality, 20 to 40% gap in perception of all of those factors. So the physical, mental, social, and financial help. That's a big gap in understanding and appreciation of situations. How can organizations become more attuned to their workforce and the factors at play?
So I think we touched on it. Marcia, you want to go ahead? I thought you were going to say something. If not, I'll jump in.
Yeah, I just went off of mute. No, I was gonna say that this, and you touched on this, Philip, this idea of middle management. I think one of the biggest things is education. It's one of our biggest initiatives in our Jedi Council is how do we educate and empower our managers to be aware and knowledgeable of how to react, right? Like so many, in engineering world, we want like the tool, like what's the right tool for the right job, right? So there's always like this idea, right? Like my boss was like, well, what's the tool that I need for this? Like they're looking for the right hammer or the right screwdriver. And that's not necessarily clear to find, right? When we're talking about social, mental, economical struggle with an associate, what they're dealing with. And so this idea of being able to educate that there is no one tool, that is a very different mindset for an engineer, and so this idea that educating our management, educating our supervisors that are running teams to be thoughtful. And I think COVID really, in my experience, COVID really helped that, because after COVID, regardless of what company I was at, I had contractors asking me, can I get this done? Right? Because we were all working from home. People saw cats, dogs, families, everything. Everybody was flattened, right? During COVID, everybody was the same. I could talk to the C-suite of this company or the president of a construction company, and guess what? They're sitting at home just like I'm sitting at home. So the world kind of got, at least in the construction industry, got really lateral, right? Everybody ended up going down to some level of playing field. If you had internet, you were working, right? And so I started having a lot more people be more hospitable and human instead of berating and yelling about schedules and budgets, and with valid responses, right? If you are delaying a project, that costs money. But now when I'm back in the office dynamic, you have grown men with 3 kids, like I have to leave at 4:30 to go pick up the kids. And I'm like, really? So now you're a parent, right? Versus like previously when it was more of the responsibility of maybe a mother or a grandparent, right? Now there's this equitable sharing of parenting children and the family dynamic. So I think that helped, but then also educating a lot of our supervisors about, and management teams about really the struggles, and that comes from story sharing. And that's something that we promote really heavily, very similar to what Clarence was talking about. We have in our internal green room, and we have opportunities for people to share all the time. And the more people share, the more inclusivity becomes a part of the natural dynamic. Engagement is huge. So if you share, is someone engaging with you? It's the same thing as the social media world, right? But internally, it can be the same thing. If no one's acknowledging your sharing, that could prevent them from sharing next time. And so there's this constant need for our Jedi Council to always be like picking up on these cues, and right, picking up the cues in the office dynamic, because every office out of all the offices nationwide are very different. Picking up those cues, running with them, finding opportunities to, hey, let's have an event for, in Tampa, obviously, Clarence is in Tampa, where like the Hispanic culture is very diverse. And so we just talked about all the diversity just amongst the Hispanic culture throughout Hispanic Heritage Month. And I think that's where having some of your ambassadors, empowering them and asking them to help. I think the president of WGI is very, he loves to come to our meetings and just listen. He's not there to speak. He's there to listen. And I think that's what's been the biggest change for us.
Yeah, so as I think about, and thank you, Marcia, that's interesting, but if you start thinking about, if you have not earned my trust, I won't be open with you. If I have an environment that I don't feel that I'm valued, there's no trust there. So you will never know what's going on with me. People have multitude of things that they're dealing with before they get to the workspace. So I think the question was, I think one way not because of the pandemic, just because in general. So if we talk about hybrid, people working hybridly, right? That could solve some of the problems that would alleviate some of that stress and the depression and so forth in regards to that. But it gets back to the core. What is the fiduciary responsibility for an organization that manage people, right? If you're working in a people-oriented environment, how do you try to make that the best environment from a psychological safety standpoint? Well, I got to be able to earn your trust. I'll be able to listen to you. It's one thing for CEOs or executives to listen, but what is being done behind that? How quick do you respond to the need aggressively? And that may be, how do you get beyond your own biases that you have within the organization? How do you push against the grain? That's how you win people over. That's how you create high-performing organizations. You know, that at the end of the day, that's a huge step for some people, some organizations, because they're so culturally conditioned in their own way that they will push that needle, you know, for that. So I think to that point, it's not a cookie cutter effect. I think you need to look at each individual, but if you truly invest in your people, then it'll come out. Create an environment that's open, that you may not agree with, but it's open, and then have some action behind that.
I loved exactly what you said, Philip. I mean, you're dead on, and again, that's why, you know, I started earlier talking about our core purpose as you know, providing an environment for our individuals to flourish, because the key is to be intentional. And I think that's one thing, both as individuals, but as an organization, being intentional, and it's not just lip service. I think that you had said it, I was going to say it, that developing trust, as I said to I have some young adults, teenagers, young adults, and I say to my kids, trust is something that takes a lot of time, takes time to develop, but is easily lost. And so I won't get on the personal side of that story, but that is fundamental to what we do. And being able to be vulnerable and having those conversations. And I think that I'll sort of tie it back to, as an organization, after the start of COVID, we were very intentional in the fall of 2020, said that we were going back to the office with all the measures that we had to put in place. And yes, we started spacing people 6 feet apart and all these things that went in play. And the reason why we did that was that we realized early on that our people, I mean, we don't make widgets, right? Our people really is what the company is founded on. And so oftentimes, again, senior folks around the firm, yeah, we can work remotely, but we realize in order to have those bonds, create that environment of mentorship and learning, working amongst themselves. Someone who just came out of college didn't have a workplace environment experience, and they're sitting at their home. I just hired someone earlier this year, and his biggest comment, he was a mid-level, he said that he saw his supervisor once a quarter, and that the project manager that he worked under never managed anybody. That's not an environment that I think is really conducive. So we were really intentional early on, and we said to senior professionals, you need to be in the office a certain amount of time. You know, it wasn't saying that everybody had to be at the beginning in particular there every day. We allowed for that, everybody to find what was comfortable for them. Those who had family responsibilities tended to work more from home, right? So we worked with that, but being intentional, I think, was really important, because that is really how we create this culture of that respect, that it is not, you know, as a manager and a project manager, we sort of talk down. And the last thing I will say as an organization is we spend a lot of time empowering our younger folks to actually take responsibility and so we will put them into positions where they'll be responsible for, and it could be as simple as part of the organization of the office, coordinating production, you know, because ultimately, and as last thing I'll say is that as a project manager myself or a supervisor, I love when people manage up. They're the one who's doing the work. I will try to help them grow and learn those skills. Yes, there's some stumbling along the way, but being intentional is how we really sort of move from the old way of doing things and having people in little silos and little camps and be able to take advantage of the opportunity. And lastly, I understand that I am in a profession where our folks are well paid, right? So we don't have the big range in salaries because we're not creating widgets, right? We're not doing that workforce, but I think that's where it starts, really creating that environment of respect. And so when I'll add one last thing. So when even my kids, when they start talking to whatever, service, and so my youngest one in particular, he's 15 years old. He's not on a silver spoon. He's working to get some extra money, and he realizes how tough it is to be in the service industry. Right. So when a customer comes in, and I wouldn't say just suck it up, but that's life, and that's part of, again, learning and training and transference of that culture of respect, I think is fundamental.
It is, Congressman. And again, I appreciate that. Again, it's not indictment on your organization. I know you got to go, Sarah, but let me say this. I'm talking about for all the leaders out there. Breakthrough starts in the mind. Breakthrough starts in the mind. It's up to those individuals to decide what they want to do, specifically if they're in a decision-making process. If they're in a leadership role, breakthrough, get beyond their own culture biases, whether it be conscious biases or unbiased. Breakthrough starts in the mind. They can make it happen. It don't take a long time to do that. I'm done, Sarah. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Because Clarence, come on.
Well spoken. With our last 5 minutes, I don't see any questions in the chat. I do want to return to kind of a powerful end, I believe. You have all shared various examples from your organizations or your experience, but let's take this last 5 minutes and separate the superficial from the genuine. You've all been involved with various companies, organizations, boards, committees, and you don't have to name it. In fact, probably please don't. But are there things that you have seen, steps organizations have taken in an attempt to be inclusive, to be welcoming, or generally culturally competent, where they've fallen flat? Opposite end of the spectrum, very effective methods that you have seen organizations that are truly genuine.
I'll start, and I don't. I don't have a specific instance of something that's fallen flat, but I think it's may have said it earlier, genuine. I think that whenever we can all see through what is lip service and what is truly genuine. And I think that for me, sort of it's about the individual and individuals, right? I'm at a point in my life, and Eric knows this. I had a health issue that I came back from last year, and it has really put a different perspective for me in life of what's really important in life, and that really it's the people, like friends, family, people I meet who matter, and really leaning into that and mentoring our younger folks. I think that's the most important. I think that being true to that really will cut through both the good and the bad, right? As an organization, I believe in what we do because I really do feel it's genuine. It wasn't something that Johnny come lately. We had something that started early on. We dodged, we danced through different things, but we're still headed in that same direction. So I think that would be my sort of closing would be, I love this conference. I was really appreciative when Eric sort of asked if I was available to talk about it, because I feel that leaning in and our voices, as much as only for today, I want our voices to get out there in all the different facets, right? So whatever organization I think we are individually part of, that's where I think the success would be, is really to continue these conversations.
I think I'm going to keep mine to associates the lowest bottom of your organization will tell you everything you need to know. The one thing about the workforce is that if they come into an environment that you have given them an opportunity to say that we're doing all of those things, 6 months, that's it. They're going to realize in 3 to 6 months, nope, this is not what you said you were going to do. And they will make a change. And that's, I think, where companies are falling flat. When you have turnover within the first 3 to 6 months of a human being that joins your organization. It doesn't matter if they're entry level, 5, 10, 15 years, they're going to see very quickly, were you giving me that lip service, or is this genuinely what you said you were doing, how the operations operate? So I think that if associates are coming in and they have a voice and they're using it, but if the reciprocation from leadership is not listening and picking up and implementing, we've implemented so many things in 18 months. I've been even more like surprised. Like, things have come up. People have made changes in the workforce that have driven the change, because just we created a conversation, an opportunity to talk about different things, other things that I thought was on my year 3 or 4 plan. Like, we're not gonna talk about this stuff until I've built something. And next thing you know, someone individually makes a change and shares a story, and it's driven a change in the company. And so that's where I think is interesting. So I think where people can fall flat is if people are speaking at the lowest level is where I think you need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Well, I think that organizations fall flat once they get exposed and the camera's there, because then they scurry out and try to get these consultants to create these phrases that they may not follow. I think that, to your point in regards to the board of directors, I think you have seen some shifts in that. It needs to be more. There needs to be inclusive of, again, a broader population, because it's a big world out here, at the end of the day. When the more in tune you are with, and I don't like to call them lower level, the individuals that's at the front line, the better you'll be. And that needs to be not sometime, but all the time, quite frankly,
I think if you don't have that representation in the leadership, what's the succession plan? Do you have one? I think even if you talk about those level of things, that sets the pace for someone that is coming out saying, hey, there's an opportunity because there's a succession plan, and they're verbal about it. They're transparent about it. They're promoting people. I think that, because you're not going to get it overnight unless you just steal all the best people all over the country. So, whatever, you could do that too. But the reality is you want people to grow and learn from somebody. Every single person that's part of a mentoring program that has volunteered their time to mentor, 9 times out of 10, I've seen that they're mainly minorities, women and minorities. Why? Because we understand the value of mentoring, because someone either helped us or we're trying to.
Well, I push back. I also think that
having that succession planning, I think, is key.
Yeah. But Marcia, people that have privilege also need to be mentored too. It's not just for minorities. I think that's where that whole culture shift is. Because
there's a huge allyship. There's a huge section of allyship that tons of education that has to happen. There's no way that we're going to do it ourselves. There's no way that I got here just from a whole bunch of female structural engineers out there.
Well, I think every day you can do something.
There's a lot of allies. There's a lot of people that have helped me, but it was because I was able to share. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
Every day you can do something. I really would like to close on that comment. I like that a lot. I want to thank Marcia, Philip, Clarence so much for your time and engagement on this session. And I encourage you to look at the great comments in the chat that you received, because you probably didn't have the opportunity to see them. And I'll pass it back on to Eric. Thank you for your time.
So good. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice meeting everybody.
Sorry about that. I was talking to myself. I'm always doing that in my own mind. So thanks to Philip, Marcia, Clarence, Sarah for a really engaging conversation. Definitely love the fire that's going on, that's lit under people that are passionate about the work that they're doing. I wanted to share something before we jump into our next panel. And that is, when we first started to do this work, this particular conference started pulling all these pieces together, it was originally called Building Momentum in a Polarized Society. And I had a conversation with a white colleague, professional, that was like, here we go again. And I was like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? No, we're having this conversation again about how bad things are. Can we celebrate the positives? And I said, the positive is that we're thriving, but we're acknowledging that it's a house divided. So what became apparent to me was that he was right. And so we changed the name midstream to Pathways to Healing in a Polarized Society. None of the content changed. but we're looking at more of a community-oriented healing dynamic to bring us together. And that's why you see in the logo, pushing the house back together. How do we thrive in this house divided? Another piece is that when I originally started to talk to many of the panelists, many of them were like, so this is about race. And I said, no, it's not. Because when you start to look at the multiple dimensions of diversity, that's why the panels are so diverse. That's why there's all these dimensions of diversity. So hopefully anyone in the audience can connect in with someone on each one of these panels based upon those dimensions of diversity. Because we've experienced the Great Resignation. We're experiencing now quiet quitting. And the idea of it is that people are disengaged because they don't believe in the organization that they're a part of. So part of this process is to also understand that this is not necessarily about race. That has an impact, yes. That is a part of it, yes. It's not solely the issue. So especially when you're looking at hiring the best and the brightest, which many say, but ended up hiring the local and not so dim, you have to look at, are you creating a space and place for folks to really engage in with your organization? Are you creating a space where they want to be there and they're going to give you their best? Or are you creating another space by which someone is just going to buy their time until they can get to the next opportunity? There's something to consider, that some of these conversations seemingly are about race, but they're really about engagement and how do you extract the best out of the people that are with you and that are working for you. So there's something to add, another tidbit to add to the conversation. We're going to move along now into our panel number 5, which is called The Misplaced Hero When Woke Goes Wrong. And I'll turn it over to Sam.
Good afternoon, everyone, panelists, attendees, all of you. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sam. I am your friendly neighborhood facilitator for this afternoon's session titled The Misplaced Hero When Woke Goes Wrong. Joining me are our panelists, Mo Cohen, Chief Legal and External Affairs Officer for Devoted Health Incorporated, Jen Yeagley, CEO of St. Pete Free Clinic, and Matt Armstrong, Director of Planning and Development at St. Pete Distillery. Thank you once again, panelists, for joining us today. I'm confident that everyone here is waiting with bated breath to hear from all of you on this hot topic of wokeness. This session will last about 50 minutes. Toward the last 5 to 10 minutes of the session, should we have any questions from the audience, we will answer it during that time. So without further ado, panelists, are we ready to dive right in? Yes?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm seeing some smiles. I'm getting an absolutely from Mo. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So folks, please answer for me. How does the concept of being woke, or the term woke itself, show up for you specifically as an individual in both your personal and or your professional lives? And you are welcome to unmute yourself and answer as you see fit.
I'll take a shot, Sam. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you and with Matthew and Jennifer and the audience. It's good to be here by invitation. My old college friend, Eric Smith. I see you out there, E. Great job. To your question, Sam, how does it show up in my personal and private life, professional life, being woke? You know, for me, look, as a Black man living in America, living in society, being woke is, as much as it's become a catchphrase for some, a flashpoint for others, a way of life. It's always just been part of my experience, my being. Being woke means being aware of, or trying to be as aware as possible of yourself, your circumstances, your history, and the histories that impact your own. As a Black man, that's unavoidable. As a Black person, that's unavoidable in this country because of the history of Black people in this country. And over time, as I've matured personally and professionally, it's become to mean even more concretely around issues of social justice, fairness, and equality in every facet of my life. And I carry it with me in the workplace. I try to promote it in the workplace. As a senior executive in this organization and others, you know, I proudly carry my history, my culture with me. I firmly believe being woke is not just being attuned to issues of social justice, particularly around race, gender, ethnicity, other considerations, and fairness generally. But it's also trying to share perspective and help other people along their own journey to gain a deeper and broader understanding of our collective histories, the individual parts of it that stand out,
that make us unique, but how it all comes together, woven together in the fabric of our culture and our community. So that's what it means to me. I have, having said that, I'm, like many people, I've been frustrated in recent years of how the word, the concept, the notion has been co-opted into something almost weaponized. And I think that's weaponization is reflective of a fear of the power of people being woke to cultural, social justice and other initiatives. And so, as we too often do in our society and culture, when people fear something, they try to squash it, demonize it, so that it won't take root and spread to the masses. And that's the challenge, I believe.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Mo. Jen, Matt, would either of you like to go?
I think the way that the word has shown up lately, or even 5 years ago, 5 to 10 years, it's something that white people have co-opted. And that, we have a deserved reputation and a practice of taking terms, art, other elements of culture from, Black and other communities of color, bringing those into our spheres without necessarily having an appreciation or understanding of the value, background, and reverence of a certain term or thing. And we try to make it our own and assign our own meaning to it. And so, as Mo is talking about the experience of a Black man and his experience of this word, I think as a white woman, I have seen what white people have done to that word and the concept. And I think it speaks to the broader topic of this panel as we think about what woke means, and, even in liberal white spaces, where I think that's where the term started filtering into white folks' parlance, was in, liberal parlance around, oh, I'm woke. And that's a good thing. And it may be true. And at the same time, again, I think it is the use of that term is part of a broader, more troubling tradition of white people taking on things that aren't necessarily ours to take on, without an understanding of where they come from and how best to actualize ourselves in spaces that maybe aren't ours. And so I've always had a little bit of a tension with that term in any case, even knowing what the meaning behind it is. And now, as we've seen the evolution of the term itself being co-opted even further into very problematic ways, in the way that it is weaponized, to Mo's point, I feel like there's even more danger attached to a concept that was once was not ours. And never was ours to claim or do anything with. So that is my experience of that term, and more recently, the way that it has been co-opted.
Thank you, Jen. I'd love to put a little sticky on that, because you use the words, Mo said the word has almost been weaponized in recent times. You've talked about the danger of the word, the evolution of the word, so on and so forth. And we are going to get a little bit further into that as well. But I'd love to hear Matt's thoughts on the question as well before we move forward.
Yeah, I think it's been said a lot already. My reflection on this, even last night and this morning, was just I haven't made it enough a part of my own life or my own routine, right? And I think it's kind of like really listening to something, or really understanding the history, as folks so eloquently said. I can't even attempt to understand something at its root, or really embody what it means, or do anything to change it, unless I make that part of my normal routine. So it's kind of like getting in shape. If someone says, "Oh, I'm going to get in shape because my doctor said XYZ. I have these things I got to address. I should take care of it." If I go to the gym one time and I exercise once and I feel good because I went did my bit, and then I leave, but I don't go back, I'm not getting in shape. I'm not changing anything about me or anything outside of that. I have to go back every day. I got to go back at least 20, 30 minutes every day and put that work in on myself, whether I want to or not. And I have to do that until it becomes a part of my lifestyle, becomes a part of a mindset, or becomes a part of who I am, so that I I don't want to not do that anymore. And I think, at least for me, until I get to that point with understanding what woke means, or everything that's beyond that, everything that is wrapped up in that, until I do that, I can't expect anybody else to do it. I have to do it first. I have to take that direct action of doing that. It doesn't have to be huge, just that 20 minutes every day, going to the gym, whether that's, in the case of what we're talking about, reading, listening, absorbing, is probably the first thing that I would need to do.
Thank you, Matt. That's such a great analogy. And so true, right? Like, we have three completely different experiences here, three very different understandings and versions of woke presenting itself to us. And I want to come back to what Mo and Jen said earlier about the evolution of the word woke, and ask you all a question about that. And, whoever feels comfortable and like this has been a part of their lives and you want to answer this question, please go ahead and do so. I'd love to hear how you have witnessed or experienced the transformation of that term woke over a period of time, right? In terms of how it's emerged and how it is also being currently used in a very particular political context.
Wow, Sam, that's a heady question. So let me give it a shot, because it's interesting. The word, for me, the political woke in the political context, it's become to be thought of these days, and often, as I said, in a weaponized fashion. I think really began to emerge in the mid 2010s or whatever, and maybe we peg it around the time of Michael Brown's killing in St. Louis, the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, where woke, I think for many people across at least American society, was heard for the first time either as a new concept or heard differently than it heard it before. Again, referencing my own experience, I'd heard the word woke all of my life, right? But not necessarily in that political context. You could have been, you could have said to friends in college, you heard the latest hip hop artist and you awoke to a new sound, right? And actually, the word actually does have a lot of roots in American musical culture, jazz in particular. But it's also always had this notion of being aware or being awakened to certainly one's own history in all aspects of it, certainly the positive aspects of it, but also the difficulties that have impacted people's lives and cultures, and trying to get other people to appreciate those impacts and that history. And I think after the Brown killing, that latter definition took on even heightened importance, because we had a national conversation around being woke to the issues of police brutality, the diminution in the value of Black lives, particularly Black male lives, and interaction with police. And the concept was, hey, you just need to be aware that this is happening. And it's not just happening now, it's been happening since the dawn of this nation, right? When police forces were founded, right, to go after slaves, runaway slaves, right? So you need to understand that history and how that history impacts the present. You need to be awoke. You need to be awakened to that. And that's really what it's about. Now, the fact of the matter is, and I appreciate what Matt said earlier in his opening comments, because, and I'm going to steal this from a friend of mine, former Governor Deval Patrick, he's fond of saying, right, to really appreciate and respect the concept of being woke, we have to give space to those who are still awakening. Being woke isn't a destination. Being woke is committing yourself to understanding, listening, and learning and sharing over the span of your life about the things that impact our lives, and particularly where there's injustice and where there's inequality, right? And particularly if you find oneself in a privileged position, understand that privilege sometimes, most oftentimes, comes at cost to someone else, right? It doesn't create it at a whole cost. So be awakened to that reality, but also give space to other people who may be behind you in their own woke journey, and help them come along, but also show them grace for the fact that they're just not where you think they should be at that moment, or where you perceive yourself being. And then on the political front, then I'll stop talking. I realize I'm dominating this conversation. I'm sorry. But look, the reality is the American political discourse right now is at its lowest point in our lifetime. And I can say that as someone who spends a lot of time in and around politics, have been in office. And we live in a time and a space where even the most well-intentioned concepts, constructs are readily co-opted for craven purposes. And as I said earlier, the attention that woke gets in the political context is it's just bastardized in a way that is designed to get people not to think about and engage on what they need to be awakening to, but instead to denigrate those who want to encourage and involve others in that awakening that would make us all better to each other, better for each other, better citizens in our collective community. And that's driven by fear of loss, irrational as it may be. So I want to quash and keep that down because the status quo benefits me, right? And so let me take this word, which speaks to the concept and the notion of helping everyone understand the issues of equality, injustice, fairness, and try to bring us all up and level up on our understanding. And let me push that down, because that's dangerous to my status quo, my privileged position. And that's why we're having this ridiculous conversation around anti-wokeness, around anti-CRT. Like, it's, you know, the fact that it's 2022 and that there is a movement designed and rooted in the notion that you should stop learning and you should not want the truth to be known to you is a shame and is a poor reflection on the principles upon which this nation was founded, and which those same people claim that they're celebrating.
Thank you so much, Mo. I'm also going to strongly encourage you to please not apologize for dominating the conversation, because you are taking each and every one of us to whatever religious institution it is that we may or may not believe in. So thank you for that background, and thank you for that insight. Jen, Matt, would either of you like to explore this question with us?
So, you know, I think it's, I can't improve upon what Mo said, but sort of piggybacking, when I think about recent history, and particularly the murder of George Floyd, and at that time, you know, we were in the early days of a global pandemic, and so many people were safely at home, as I know has been mentioned before, engaging on social media and virtually in ways that we've never have and never had to in our lifetimes. And as a result of that, as we know, many people who had not awakened to or explored or understood, you know, horrific issues like police brutality against, you know, Black communities and Black men in particular, and, you know, other areas of social justice, suddenly were glued, you know, to social media feeds and to the news, and having an opportunity, maybe had opportunities before and did not recognize those before them, but couldn't escape the opportunity at that time of seeing what is unfolding in our racial history as a country. And as a result of that, you know, we saw white people, you know, people of so many different diverse backgrounds jumping into protests around the globe, and jumping into the discourse in a way that, you know, I don't know that we've seen in decades. And so I think that, you know, that collective coming together, that's where maybe that awakening that Mo was speaking to, the nature of being woke, I think kind of peaked. And then we saw, you know, I think a year or so, and that was a great thing, right? This opportunity to come together and learn, and as, you know, from the perspective of a white person, to learn more and to understand and to really engage in that process of awakening. That kind of togetherness, shared belonging, understanding, seeking to understand is very dangerous to the status quo. To Mo's point, it shakes up ladders of privilege. It moves us toward equity, which upsets the apple cart for people who have enjoyed power and privilege for centuries. And so as a result of that, there is always a backlash, has always been a backlash to that type of movement. And we saw it very quickly in this case. Certainly in political spheres and everything that we're seeing now with co-opting the term and anti-woke legislation and, you know, weaponizing that term. Learning and awakening should never be a bad thing, but now is being characterized as such because of the danger of what happens when we come together around a common goal of equity. I think too, not just in the political sphere, but we've also seen socially, maybe it was a year or so after this coming together around, you know, a desire to move the needle on equity. A lot of people, a lot of white folks in particular, started to take a backseat again and say, whoa, 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 I have now reached the peak of my awakening. I am no longer comfortable because now I'm going to have to begin to move to another level of my own self-exploration and unpacking of my own privilege. And what do I lose in the process of equity? And I don't like that anymore. And so you see surveys that came out maybe a year later when so many people were supportive of Black Lives Matter concept and movement, that those percentages declined rapidly within 6 months to a year. And so I think that awakening is a continued process. And now so a lot of that has sort of been shut down. For one, both socially and then also, of course, politically with all of the rhetoric, it doesn't help moving the needle. So again, it's just a swinging of the pendulum and an inevitable backlash, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think building on what Jen and Mo said, it's been said, and it was Dr. Martin Luther King himself who said it. It's almost not the folks that are most vocal in opposition, the ones that are anti-woke and promoting all of this. Everybody knows where they stand. It's pretty clear. It's in the privileged position, like myself, that if we just are passive, if we're disengaged, I think Mo had said that, disengaged. And as Jen mentioned, you get to a point where it's like, it kind of peaks, and then, oh, wow. If I want to go further with this now, yeah, I got to go to the gym twice a day now. Now I got to crank that treadmill up a little bit more, and that's painful. And then if I go down that path, I got to be able to sustain that. Well, I don't know. I can get away with not doing any of that. I could just retreat. I'm fine because I don't have to live that reality. As Mo mentioned, I'm not affected or subjected to hundreds of years of bad behavior. If I just disengage, there's no great consequence to me or to my family. And so it's easy. It's easy to just stop. It's a lot harder to keep going. And so I think that's almost the greatest threat to change is that middle ground, that gray area of like, you know, it's a great line from Hamilton like that, right? It's like, you know, Hamilton goes against Burr because Burr didn't stand for anything, right? He's like, well, at least Jefferson, I hate the guy. I disagree with his politics, but at least I know where he stands, you know, and that's kind of a clear example. We listen to that a lot, but engaging and following through with it, that's huge.
So we see the original meaning of the term woke and the communities that it has been a part of for decades and centuries. Then we see the co-opting of the word woke. We see the escalation of the co-opting of the word woke in some very, very positive manners. And then we see the drop in that escalation and almost allies and folks cruising for a little bit because they don't necessarily have to be involved. The impact is not felt by them.
Recording stopped.
If they are no longer involved, right? And at that point, they become the silent but deadly majority, almost, right? And so that brings us to, you know, we've given this really thorough, detailed, and very diverse understanding and background and evolution of the term woke itself as it stands in the United States and what that looks like for different people. But that brings us to the other half of what the session is about and how sometimes, and why is it, that term woke can go so wrong, right? So sometimes when woke goes wrong, a well-intentioned person sees themselves possibly as a hero who is working on behalf of the Black community or folks of color. If we're talking about race specifically, then the Black community or folks of color. So let's talk about that aspect of it. Can you all share with me your
recording in progress?
Can you all share with me your perceptions or understandings of how these misplaced heroes impact that perception of being woke?
I'll jump into that. This is such I'm speaking so hesitantly, and those of you who know me a little bit know that that is not who I am. I don't stumble over stuff, and I've been reflecting on the topic of this panel and these questions for like some days now, and I'm like, how do we talk about this? It's a very nuanced topic, so just forgive me for my hesitation as I speak. I'm trying to find to put the right words to there, put any words to it, but so. Just like there's no monolith, there's no monolith, right? But in sort of stereotypical white American culture, we love a hero. You look at the history of cinema, you look at the, music and all of that. It's like hero worship. That is a very American ethos, that individual hero. It is embedded in our ethos as a country. So we see these images over and over. And then I feel like the way that plays out, when white people get woke and suddenly we're learning things and we want to be helpful and it is well-intentioned and that's all good, but it's wanting, I feel like in many cases, there's this level of wanting recognition or visibility or a pat on the back or any of those things and being regarded in being put in high regard for doing the absolute least. It's like for centuries, people of color have fight these battles daily, whether on a level of, being impacted by microaggressions on a daily basis or aggressive, racial aggression, which has happened to every person of color I know on multiple occasions throughout their lives. So just getting out there, walking through the world is far more an act of heroism, than me speaking up at a conference and saying, hey, I'm a good white person. I'm here, I want to be visible as someone who's doing good things and being an ally. And so I think that, for those of us for white folks who want to support economic and racial and social justice and help move the needle on equity, it is really unpacking that and getting outside of ourselves and moving away from the need for being that hero, needing that recognition. I think that's step one. Or somewhere in the top 3 steps. I don't know if it's step 1, but it's up there. It's up real high. And like if you need to unpack that and not need that for one, we're doing the least. So let's not expect hero worship for that.
Jen, I appreciate you sharing your truth, your hesitancy and your thought about this panel and this discussion. You weren't the only one, right? I had some similar thoughts. Actually, it's just about the word woke itself. It's a word actually I don't use that often in my life, as much as I know the concept, have used it. It's a word because it's co-opted and been weaponized. At some level, Sam, I just discard it now because I don't want to get caught up in the word. I like to get caught up in the meaning of the actions that gave rise to the word, right? That's a much more useful conversation. And I think it's a conversation that actually gets you to further along in dialogue with people if everybody isn't caught up on the word, right? To your specific question about misplaced heroes, that's an interesting concept because I think anybody who's willing to engage on the substance, right, who willing to acknowledge that they are on their learning journey and that there's things they just don't understand, right? They don't understand why I may feel uncomfortable when I see a police officer, right? And I've had someone say this to me. They're like, what are you talking about? You were a US senator, you're a partner in a law firm, you're an executive. Why would you feel uncomfortable around a police officer? And I would say, because I'm a Black man in America, right? And you need to understand the history of Black people in policing, right? And not all police officers are bad, we know that, but our history is filled with numerous examples where Black bodies have been policed as if they were valueless. And the system has been designed to perpetuate and protect that behavior. So that's why I have that fear. So anybody who's willing to engage with me on that and wants to lean in on that and maybe even ask me awkward, uncomfortable questions about it, right? And I've had people say to me, listen, I don't know, listen, I'm white. I don't know, is the phrase, should I say Black people? Should I say African-American? I had a guy say to me originally, listen, hey, I grew up in the 50s. We said Negro. I said, listen, okay. I said, let's not go with Negro. I'm not gonna get offended by that. I said, but just go with Black folks. I said, because not every Black person is African-American, right? Because we have to respect, to your point, Jen, like we're not monoliths, right? There's different cultures across all of our society. I said, just go with Black person. But my point in sharing that with you is I wanted him to know that it was uncomfortable and it was okay in that moment for him to be uncomfortable asking something with the fear that it may make me uncomfortable, right? Because we have to push through those moments if we're ever going to try to get to a better place. And let me be clear about this. I'm never saying or suggesting that you should ever stand for anyone disrespecting you or calling you out of your name, intentionally trying to rile you up. But we also have to understand we all are products of a society and culture where none of us have been properly or fully educated about the rest of us. And if we ever want to get to a better place, we all have to be open to not only willing to listen and learn, but to share and have those uncomfortable conversations. So sometimes, Sam, those misplaced heroes, at least in my life, have just been people on their journey who were bold and brave enough to step out there and ask what in any other circumstance might have been a hard question. But because we had a relationship, they were a little more comfortable asking that question to me. And I respected that. Now, there are some people out there who want to be heroes in the moment, right? And they want the credit. They want to seize the zeitgeist, right? And, you know, they want to be on the front pages. They want to get the tweets out. They want to be seen as that cultural hero. But you know who those people are. You know what they're really about. So the less oxygen or attention we give those people, the faster they go away. And we can then give our energy and interest to those folks who are perhaps quieter, asking the questions, wanting to do the work, wanting to lean in, wanting to be a true ally, right? And that happens, and I know this conversation, or at least this question is grounded in issues around race, but it's not just race. You know, I'm a Black man who grew up in the South, Southern US. You know, I would tell you, my community, which is not monolithic, but the Black community in this country has to acknowledge that we are on our own awakening and we're far from being woke about justice and fairness, equality for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, right? And the transgender community. We have just got to do better, right? I go home back down to North Carolina in my Southern roots, and the conversations I can readily find myself in with family and old friends around topics of gender identity, and the lack of understanding is shocking. So what do? Right? I shouldn't beat my chest and say to everybody, listen, I'm farther along on my journey than you are. What we need to do is not act like the hero in that moment. Well, if you're going to act like a hero, remember the job of the hero is to save as many people as possible. So spend time trying to help everybody else advance themselves on their journey and understand the connection between the struggle, the fight for justice between communities of color and the LGBTQ community, right? We've got to move along in that same fashion. And at the end of the day, we all have a chance to be a hero if we earnestly, honestly, sincerely lean in on these issues and try to help each other understand as we try to develop and better our own understanding.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I love what you said, Mo, when you said what the hero's supposed to do. And I think that's a good reminder anytime you're you're struggling with something as to what do I do next? It's like, okay. What's the simple action here that I can take? What's the simple mandate? A hero is supposed to save as many people as they can. Ideally, to Jen's point, not beat their chest about it. They just do it. They do it quietly. Some of them, they wear masks. They're doing it in the cover of night. You know, you don't even know who their identity is. They're just doing it because it's the right thing to do, and they're trying to save as many people as they can, and they don't want any recognition for it. I think even then, that hero can be misplaced. I mean, someone, Sam, I think you were talking about comics, you know, earlier, right? And these characters that they don't want any glory. They just want to do what's right, but sometimes they're going about it the wrong way, or they forget why they're doing it. Whatever the reason. There's an example of this in my own life where, you know, I was set to go to the Peace Corps. There was a point I was going back to graduate school for urban planning, and they had a program where you could go to the Peace Corps, and you serve in the Peace Corps for a couple of years, then you come back and you reflect on that, you write a dissertation about it, thesis, and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things I learned along that process was there were all these hero types that thought, oh, I'm going to go to the Peace Corps. They weren't necessarily banging their chest about it. They genuinely cared and wanted to do something good. And they didn't care if anybody knew about it or not. Whole organizations like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or the U.S. Agency for International Development. There's a long list of all these groups trying to do good. Going into other countries, other cultures, other places without a really in-depth understanding of cultural values that were there, people's roles and responsibilities, whether it was based on their gender or their age in a certain group or a society, and imposing these solutions onto those groups, thinking that that was the best course of action because we know we're advanced in our thinking in this regard. So we're going to go into a country on the African continent and go into a village and say, okay, here's a bunch of sewing machines now. Now you can make a whole bunch of stuff a whole lot faster and everything else. Well, that upset the whole apple cart. It didn't necessarily solve the problem because the groups coming in never bothered to ask anyone that was there what they needed. They just assumed they needed this, or they assumed they needed a giant tractor or a combine to go and harvest things because, well, you should do it the way we do it, and then you'll be better off. If you do it like we do it, you'll be better off. That was a total failure because the heroes in that case really didn't understand who they were trying to save or why they needed saving. They're just running in there, knocking things down and everything else and making a mess, you know, like a lot of these superhero movies do. You know, it's like, I'm fighting the bad guys here, but there's a whole lot of collateral damage that's happening all around me and I'm not even aware of it. In fact, I think there's some storylines like that where there's some character that gets hurt or injured because of some colossal fight with where the superhero's fighting the bad guy. And now that person resents that hero for it. Even though that hero was trying to do good, they're resented by someone else because they didn't think about them in the process of trying to help somebody else. So, yeah.
Matt, I think that's a good summation of about 75% of the Marvel Cinematic Universe right there, buddy.
Right.
So,
I was just gonna say that's the entire plot of the Avengers, the first movie.
yeah.
That's the whole thing where they destroy New York.
Right.
No, there's some excellent points being made. You know, I hope folks are taking notes because, I mean, the first thing is remember the assignment, read the job description, right? And then listen to the people. The people in need are the people that know what is best for them and that have an understanding of what they need the most in order to have an effective solution to solve the problems that they do, right? And so I also loved Mo, your point about as long as it's safe and as long as it's respectful, let's try and chat with people about more about what woke does than what woke is. Right. And I really respect that. I really like that perspective. It's such a wonderful way to frame how we can continue to do this work without necessarily calling it woke work if we have to, right? If we can avoid that. But we also know that, you know, when we're talking about all these concepts, we're talking about heroism, we're talking about wokeness, we're talking about, you know, like you said, this concept of a savior complex potentially going into other countries and not knowing what they need, but assuming that what you have is exactly what they need. You can see that both domestically and internationally, right? It's not a hard Google search before you find answers to questions like that, right? Like in what ways do US persons necessarily provide examples of the savior complex, right? You could just do a Google search for that and get multiple examples. But we know that none of these are isolated incidents. They are they're symptoms of much larger issues, right? The roots of these issues are things that if we are able to get to those roots, potentially we are also able to then see a way forward and see a solution for it. So given the fact that these symptomatic issues do often overshadow the root causes of the problem of when woke goes wrong, what do y'all think are some useful strategies as individuals, you know, as humans who walk through this world? What do y'all think are some useful strategies that folks and organizations at large can also take on to directly address that kind of discrimination, inequity, exclusionary practice that comes from either this wokeness or this expectation of hero worship, do y'all think?
I think distilling down, well, first of all, understanding or looking at the difference between optics versus action. So again, you know, when I think about in the wake of George Floyd's murder, there were a lot of companies that came out with statements, and I'm not mad at that. You know, there are a lot of that paved the way to normalize even talking about Black Lives Matter in a national and global sphere in a way that had not happened prior since the movement began after Trayvon Martin's murder. So, I mean, it was good that Amazon and Netflix came out with statements. And I'm not saying that's where things ended, but if it ends with the statement, that's optics and not action. And so I think it's unpacking that, you know, making statements, doing something public is not a bad thing. What's behind it? And I think that the way to begin to address root causes is a recognition for each of us, because we can only start from where each of us is individually. In order to move mountains and to move policy and systems, we have to understand where we are grounded as a human, as a person today. And so it's really taking stock of who am I? What are my areas of privilege? What are my areas, you know, what are those areas where in my personal identity, I don't experience privilege? And how do I allow all of that to coexist? And, you know, how do I know myself? So that's step one. And then I think it's looking at our lanes, our spheres of influence, the areas where we have power to possibly create change. So for me personally, you know, Sam knows this about me. I'm not one, I don't protest. I support it, but it's not my lane. I choose a different lane in terms of action. So the way that, you know, for example, during a time of protest, I may be available to support in other ways, but I'm not out in the streets in that way. I have the great privilege of being CEO of a nonprofit organization, and that is a position of power. And so in that position of power, how do I use that positional privilege to move the needle on equity, belonging, and justice, both internal to my organization with my employees, my volunteers, the communities we serve, and also in the ways that I show up in the community and represent myself and my values around this. So that's one example of where I think I have some small modicum of power that's meaningful, you know, but small in the grand scheme of things. Folks, there are people who are leaders in their civic institutions. They are leaders in their faith institutions. They are community leaders and recognized as such. There are people who are running corporations, who are leaders in their neighborhood. wherever that is for us individually, whatever that looks like, I think we all have an obligation to understand those areas. Where do we have power? And based on those areas where I have power and influence, what can I do with respect to action that moves the needle? And I think that again, it looks different for everyone, but that is a start. That again, I'm talking a lot about starting points. Like we should be talking about how to get forward, but I think as a start, identify where you are, how you can act, and how you bring people along.
I would agree with all that, and I think there's this this is an interesting topic, like pre-George Floyd, post-George Floyd, right? And I agree with Jen. I was certainly happy to see so many corporations and corporate entities in that moment at least engage in optics that we all could see, that they recognize whether they fully appreciate it, but recognize in the moment the power of the importance of what was happening. The question always was going to be, was it just optics, and would it be action? In other words, was it a moment, or was it in fact a movement? And I think we have seen in the last couple of years, unfortunately for many, not most, it was more of a moment than a movement. And I think the organizations that are sincere about it, though, like the way Jen describes, are leaning into it. And I think it starts both at the top and at the bottom, if you will. And I don't say bottom to be disrespectful, but leadership in the organizations have to set the tone. What are the values that matter? Do you have a culture that is designed to respect any and all and appreciates that diversity isn't a buzzword, it isn't a mandate, but actually is a sound community, social, business philosophy that is designed to get or to develop the greatest collection of talent and to maximize that talent for your aims, whatever those aims may be. But at the same time, you have to make sure at all levels of that organization, including the entry level, people understand those values, and you're listening to how those people are experiencing those values. How's the culture impacting them, right? So it's got to come at it both ways, because if it's just coming from the top and it seems just like an edict, you're going to have a lot of people along the way who are going to reject it or view it as just some corporate speak or something that's imposed upon them, but not really important to them, right? And so if you're in organizational leadership now, I think you have to find ways to engage your workforce in a regular, consistent fashion around the values and the importance of culture, and a culture that is inclusive, appreciates the dynamic nature of the differences among people, and the way that those differences can come together to create something wholly unique, extraordinary, and beneficial. And then in those moments, and they will occur because we all are humans and thus we are flawed, right? In so many ways. In the moments when behavior is demonstrated that runs afoul of that culture, you have to defend your culture and take action to address those situations. Yes, give room for grace, because we still make innocent errors that have broad consequences. But you've got to call it out, you got to deal with it, and you got to let people know that culture, inclusion, equity is as important a business value as anything else in your organization, whether you're for profit or not for profit, right? And you've got to drive that home every day. And if all you've done since George Floyd's murder was you put your black square on Instagram, right? Or you pulled together, your employee resource groups for, employees of different races, ethnicities, or gender identities, and the CEO has only popped in once in the last 2 years, everybody knows you're full of it, right? And everybody knows that by failing not to do those things, you are demonstrating that you don't value those things. And in this era, and I listened to the last part of the panel, in this era of so much employee mobility, quiet quitting, and all this other stuff, talent will walk when they feel like their values are not respected or they're part of an organization that doesn't live out its values. And if you want to be successful in the world today, generally, whether you're for-profit, not-for-profit, government, whatever, you better have a culture and protect it that's reflective of the values of an increasingly diverse, dynamic workforce.
I absolutely agree, Mo, that the greatest value that most employees find in an organization is being valued. You know, if you feel respected, if you feel valued, if you feel treated well, if you have given an equity stake in a company, even not just a salary. And that's one thing that we've been talking a lot about as an organization that we hadn't been talking about was who are we? Like Jen said, what are the areas of power and privilege that we have from our ownership to the folks that are in the front line of what we do, and what kind of ownership stake literally do we have in a company as it goes forward, and are people valued for who they are and what they bring, and can we see the differences? I remember having it was a pretty painful conversation even among our ownership, and very point blank, you know, I remember someone saying, "Hey, I'm not racist. I've never been racist. I don't see black people or white people. I don't see color at all." And I've heard that so many times in my own life. My wife is Puerto Rican, and when we go to visit family in Puerto Rico, some members of the family have darker skin than other people. Some people are lighter skin. It's just kind of a mix because of the Spaniards coming down to the indigenous people, right? But the whole point of that conversation was that our ownership was saying, I don't see any difference. And we kind of hit the pause button right there in that moment. We said, okay, hold on. We want you to see the difference. We need you to see the differences between people that are black, people that are white, women, men, older, younger, transgender, whatever the difference is, see it. Don't pretend it doesn't exist. Don't sweep it under the rug. Don't sweep all the history under the rug. See it. Try to understand it. Respect the difference. And just like you said, Mo, you said, you know, appreciate the differences and really mean it. And the organization is going to be stronger for it. I can tell you that we're not there yet as a group. We still have a whole lot of soul searching to go. And I like your word. I wrote it down, Mo. It said about showing grace for those that are still in that journey of awakening, right? And because we're all at a different point. And all we can do is to keep trying, right? So it's like you only fail if you stop trying. So I know our group is a small group, but we're going to keep putting it out there in front of everybody. We're going to keep talking about it. We're going to keep saying it. And I can already see some things that have changed over the course of a 3-year period. There are changes. There has been an evolution of it. And that's why a lot of us are still there trying to do what little we can, grinding away at it, because at least it's changed. And you can see it, and that's kind of cool to see it change.
You only fail if you stop trying. I think that is such a fantastic quote. And if it has not seen itself on stickers and t-shirts already, then it certainly should. Because that's absolutely what it is. That's where it is. That is the lesson from all of this. If we keep trying, we will get somewhere. But if we stop, then we absolutely 100% not just fail ourselves, but we fail each other. And I think, folks, we are at 2:52, and that is a fantastic note on which to end this absolutely eye-opening discussion. We have chatted so much on, we had one question left and we didn't even get there, and that is an excellent problem to have. It only means that this conversation has been so insightful and y'all have shared such different perspectives. I'm confident that everybody in all of their varied identities that have attended this conference today and are here with us in this session have learned something not just about each one of you and the movement as a whole, but also about themselves. And now we'll have an opportunity to take what y'all have said and go back and reflect and ask themselves some questions about their own identities and who they are and how they participate in this work. So Mo, Jen, and Matt, I cannot thank y'all enough. Thank you so much for being here and part of this this panel. I hope y'all have a wonderful day ahead. With that, I'm going to throw it over to Eric.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Thanks, Mo Cowan, Matt, Jen. Really appreciate your time and comments, commentary, and kind of bringing it full circle for us. I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege and read you something because I think it's very important and apropos and was the inspiration for this particular panel. It's a letter from a Birmingham jail from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you and the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding for people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. So if you want to check out the whole letter from a Birmingham jail, you could definitely Google it. But that statement was the genesis for this conversation. So just kind of want to give a little bit more context as to where this came from and the superhero syndrome and where woke goes wrong. So we're going to make up a little bit of time here and jump right into the next panel. And so it is lateral aggression, changing the paradigm of divide and conquer, that is led by Nick James. Nick.
Hello, everybody. Can you all hear and see me? A thumbs up would be very helpful. Perfect. Well, hello and welcome to our topic in our panel discussion on lateral aggression, changing the paradigm of divide and conquer. My name is Nick James, and I'm excited to be moderating this panel of experts and truly incredible professionals. I've had the opportunity to meet them and also to work on behalf of Inclusivity as a DEI practitioner and consultant for a little bit now, and I'm honored to continue to do so and to be able to help impart some amazingly critical and productive content for you all, I think. I want to start by saying thank you to Inclusivity and to all of our participants. This conference has clearly been a tremendous opportunity for us all. In this final panel, our goal is to dive deeply into the concept of lateral aggression and provide for you some important takeaways. But first, I'll allow our panelists to introduce themselves. Melody, let's start with you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone, for welcoming and joining us as we round out this amazing conference. I've learned so much as I've listened to other sessions, and I'm super humbled to be here. My name is Melody Yu. I've worked in the field of education for over 8 years, and I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm excited to engage in this conversation with you all.
Thank you. Dr. Nadia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nadia Sasso. I am super excited to be here. I have a background in working in the DEI space for over 10 plus years. And so it's always great to connect with new audiences and get to find new colleagues in the field. So excited about today.
Thank you. Dr. Luce.
Hey, Nick. Hi, everyone. My name is Luz Randolph. I have been working in the DEI space for over 10 years. It sounds like a really long time, and it's aging me. Very excited to be a part of this panel. I've been not only in the DI space in higher education, and I also have the privilege to have worked with inclusivity in different capacities as well. Looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you. And Cal.
Welcome, everyone. It is good to see a lot of names that I'm very familiar with. I'm so proud to be a part of this panel. I wish you didn't start out in asking how many years or thinking about how many years, but because I think I just won with more than 15 years in doing this work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I started as a child. But I am very excited about this work and the work, of course, that Inclusivity has done. I'm glad to once again support Eric. Let's rock, Nick.
Great. Thank you all. I want to start, first of all, with a brief definition of lateral aggression for those of you who may not be familiar with the concept. Broadly, lateral aggression, and sometimes termed as lateral violence, can be described as a form of bullying or organized harmful behaviors that we do to each other collectively as a part of an oppressed group. It happens within our families, within our organizations, and within our communities. And often this is an effort to gain some form of power. To give that a little bit of context, I think we can point to the recent controversy in the Los Angeles City Council, where a recording of City Council President Nuri Martinez, who happened to be the first Latina to become City Council President, was leaked to the public and caught her making unfortunate and openly racist remarks about not only some of her council colleagues of color, but in general, other communities of color, saying this to fellow council members. Subsequently, she was forced to resign from LA City Council, but clearly this controversy had broader impact beyond just the LA City Council, right? This was a form of infighting between oppressed communities of color in an effort to gain some form of power, in this case, political power. So with that, I'd like to give you all the opportunity, our panelists, the opportunity to unpack the phrases lateral aggression and lateral violence. So our first question here is, why do you think the term lateral aggression or lateral violence has been used to describe conflict with in the workplace and in society between marginalized groups? Let's start with Dr. Luce.
I just knew you were gonna kick it off. First of all, thanks for that, for providing the definition and the question as to why do we think the term has been described to conflict within our own marginalized groups. And I was writing down just the thought overall of, first, let's talk about how within our own communities we have colorism, right? It doesn't surprise me overall that in the Latino community, I identify as an Afro-Latina, but in our own Latino community, we have challenges within colorism, right? There is something to be said that when we walk into our own space or within our own culture, if there's a saying in Spanish culture, para mejorar la raza, to better the race, right? And when you do the mejorar la raza, it means if you're darker skin is to get better looking hair because you have better opportunities, because you're looked at different, right? So when I think about why do I think the term is coined? First of all, I try not to look at terms and look at them too complicated, because to me, it's just a new term to say that within our own communities, we do have challenges and we do have oppressive behavior, but the oppression begins because of the society outside of us, right? Even when I think about, I wrote down and had this discussion with someone the other day, when we think about why we are crabs in a bucket sometimes, it's because we've always been placed in positions where we have to fight. When we think about slavery, the enslaved folks, right? I remember dating my ex-spouse, and I remember someone calling him a house Negro. They did not use the N-word that I'm using, right? But even within those terms, we're talking about two different types of Black, right? Who's better and who's not, from my perspective, in my opinion. So I think for me, when we're thinking about it and why it's being used and why it's impactful, is because within our own communities, we have those challenges because we've been pressed to think that way. We've been pressed to think that lighter is better, that certain look is better, that you can accomplish more if you can assimilate to the culture. And again, that's from my experience. But since you started with me and I was taking notes, that's what I'm giving. But I'll shoot it over to Cal or my other colleagues to add to it.
Yeah, perfect way of kicking it off, Luz. I will say that the discussion that you just made it broader, and we always talked about it's going to get broader, right? And you immediately did that with saying the influences of external society, right? We're talking about lateral aggression within, but it's there because of an external system. And also, if you do research around this term lateral aggression and lateral violence, then you will find post-colonial theory, how it is impacting this and causing this. You know, in a previous panel, I heard someone mention that the Spaniards had come down to Puerto Rico, and that's why they're different colors. But you know what? Let's talk about the real type of language of the colonialization of these various countries. That is trauma. And we all know the work of PTSD, of PSTD, post-slavery trauma disorder. This is what contributes to lateral. And to your question, Nick, as I started to kind of end my thoughts, your question was around also, why is this being talked about in the workplace? Because when we know that there's not enough room or enough spaces, then if women are competing for the same few spaces above the concrete ceiling, or African Americans or Hispanics or whoever that group is, dimension of diversity, we know that they're utilizing what they have been taught by that system that Luz introduced into this conversation. And therefore, and we'll talk more about this later, you know, there's a topic that, a concept, especially that's talked about in Canada, with this work is being done with the native peoples of Canada. They're also talking about how it's impacting that group too, right? Indigenous groups, because definitely feeling trauma from post-colonial theory. But they said, there's a saying that hurt people. If you've been hurt through the trauma, it's been proven, tracked, trended, that they also hurt people. And that's when we can go deeper into that definition of the bullying and the gossiping and the crabs in the barrel that defines lateral aggression.
Thank you, Cal. Melody, I'd love to hear you respond to the question or the points that have been made.
Yeah, so what I loved hearing is the parallels that even within communities of color face as well. So within the Asian community, there is still shadeism and colorism as well. And I think knowing a lot of our history contextualizes a lot of this conversation. So the reason why colorism and shadeism exists is because of colonization, because the colonizers with the power are coming into these countries, and it is a hierarchy of who can be like who. You gain more power by being like the oppressor, right? So with that, in the United States now, we use the word minority, and minority generally applies to groups who are physically distinctive from the European American majority. And it also applies to groups that are historically had discrimination and social stratification. So lateral aggression, whether it manifests in the workplace or society or everyday interaction, really stems from the desire to take on the attributes of the white dominant culture, and therefore the oppressed groups become the oppressor. So just like Cal said, hurt people, and whiteness is so complex when it comes to, in terms of power, and it perpetuates this us versus them, better me than you. And I think if we can't have these types of conversations, if we don't know about it, if we don't know about other people's experiences, other groups of parallel experiences, then we can't move forward in a productive direction. And that's why I think this conversation is so powerful because I've never had the opportunity to hear about lateral aggression in conferences like this. So I'm so excited to see and hear from the expertise of the other panelists.
Thank you, Melody. Dr. Nadia.
So yeah, I think the other panelists had some really great points. I'm just gonna kind of add to that. So in my opinion, I feel like there needs to be, as we talk about the colonizer and the colonized, right? And I'm thinking more from a, Black diasporic purview. I think there needs to be a reshaping of the dialogue between the colonizer and the colonized so that we can kind of discuss the effects and impacts of current community events or just like internally what's happening in general. I think there's a lot of self-policing, right? Back to someone's point of like the colorism, who's better, who's not, all of these different things that are happening. And in that dialogue, we're even bringing the colonizer into the conversation, even if they're not physically present. So like, how do we have more conversations that just exclude the colonizer intentionally, right? And I think my last point is more so just like, again, speaking to the subtle policing that everyone has spoken about of ourselves and of others, and like how we should be behaving or performing or what certain identities look like or what is deemed better or not. It kind of like highlights that some of these policies are almost invisible and therefore less explicit and hard to address. So we need to figure out a way to, bring these back to the forefront and like what is really happening and really have those conversations within our communities to really garner change that we need for not only ourselves, but generations to come.
Thank you to everyone. And you all made some really wonderful points about, first of all, introducing sort of your perspective on lateral aggression and lateral violence, and also bringing up certain points like colonization and the colonizer versus the colonized. And the point of minoritized groups, I think, is an important one. Groups who share a history of minoritization or marginalization and oppression, it tends to create an internal power struggle between us as groups of color. And so I want to hear a little bit more about why you all think that it's difficult or we struggle to lift each other up as people and professionals of color, given the fact that we're all facing this sort of colonized world. I'd love to start with you, Cal.
It just takes me back to once again taking a look at the system. I'm going to go back to a lesson. Most of our lessons are oral in the Black community that have been passed on. And I want to remind everyone that my great grandfather was a slave. I'm not 100 years old, okay? But I mean, that's a fact. My mother's my grandmother, her father was a slave, purchased his freedom. But then the lessons that he passed on was know the white man. And by the way, he was the product of his mother, a slave, being raped by the slave master, okay? So going back to where Lou started us with colorism, because he showed up and everyone knew he was the slave master's son. He had those somewhat privileges. Hard to believe that I would use that word, but the thing is that he got the chance to work closer with whites than others. He passed that along to his daughter, who passed it along to her daughter. Make sure that you learn how he operates, which passed it along to my mother, right? So Nick, once again, those that are the colonizers, those that are in the majority, those are with the power, we've been using their template. This is not a template also, by the way, that many groups have constantly brought from their origin. I'm saying before they were colonized, right? This is truly more of a European influence rather than to think about, okay, it happened in all these other groups, Asian, Middle Eastern, or whatever. If you go further back, we all have our diversity in how we showed up with our cultures, but oftentimes those in power have definitely influenced others. And I saw that being, pushed down as a message. And how do you handle the system? They didn't call it a system back there. They were just like, how do you survive around white folk? Well, you need to look how they operate so that you can be able to operate that way too, to be successful. And so I feel that's how it's kind of carried on, in other words. But going back into the workplace, I think that the challenge always has been, if you are looking to come together, it goes back to what I said earlier. There's limited space, even more limited space now in regards to me moving up. And therefore, we don't have that community effort. Let me just close with this one last thing, just made me think of, is that my mother, I'm a PK, I'm a principal's kid, okay? And so my mother was a principal, and it was back when they had Black schools before integration. And I remember her always saying that her teachers felt as if it was a duty, not a job, to definitely educate Black kids. That's community. That's community. Do we still have that type of community as we're walking the halls through glass and steel? Do we still have that type of community when we're looking at how our communities are being more divided, as this conference is talking about, amongst these areas, but socioeconomic, educational? Do we have that community as we used to? Does each one of these groups, Asian, Pacific Islander, or Hispanic, or do they have that community? I think that's the challenge. And we got to talk about, how do we move back to that community? How do we build that rather than this divisiveness?
Thank you, Cal. Melody, I'm going to call on you to give your thoughts or respond.
Yeah, I think there are many instances where people and professionals of color uplift and support and ally together. And I do think that there are instances where we don't. I think there are more instances of the former than the latter, but when we are asked to operate in a system and environment or business where there's what feels like a silent quota or tokenism, then it triggers this instinct to survive. So, for example, like Cal was saying, there seems to be limited space, or if there's so much room for somebody who looks like me, then the presence of another can seem threatening. So we're all vying for this amount of space. And I think it's human nature to want to survive, to be successful, aspire, progress, prosper. But when we're asked to operate in a very high stakes, or what feels like high stakes, it can be challenging. So I think some questions that we need to ask is, what's the table that we're asked to sit at? Are we sitting at a table that requires us to assimilate, to change our appearance, our clothes, how we speak, what we typically bring in for lunch? Are we asked to sit at a table that's inclusive and expansive? And I think we need to, it's not about just being inclusive, but it's about transforming systems. And I think that requires a lot more work that we need to do, and collectively as well.
Thank you. Dr. Nadia.
Thank you. So I think to Melody's point, asking about like what tables do we want to sit at, what are they inclusive, what are they providing? I think that, to be honest, I think there's an anxiety around not just what the tables look like, but how many tables should I be at because I have to reach this certain status quo and, all these different things. And just to be a little bit more explicit, I think that there's identity anxiety around working hard to manage and maintain links between if you're, an immigrant or migrant, like homeland, countries, traditions, culture, and then negotiating identities via membership of like professional groups, ethnic, alumni, so religious, now even social media, right? So I think there's not a space that actually allows room for you to be like multidimensional and not conforming to these rigid spaces or these rigid tables that you have to pick and like move through. I'm hoping what I'm saying makes sense. But I think that all of these are like influencing like the behaviors and the relationships that we kind of maintain and cultivate with one another. And to sum it all up, I think that we're not working to find like a common ground sometimes, and even celebrating our differences. And we're also not providing enough fluidity in terms of all the different things and spaces that we have to like be in and maneuver through, as well as making sure that we have spaces that are encompassing or encouraging that type of fluidity.
Thank you. Dr. Luce.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to concur with everyone is saying. I definitely resonate with the tables and how many tables and which table to be at and selecting in the space, right? Because even within our own, even the conversation about lateral aggression and sort of being this crab in a bucket component, there's a lot of pressure that goes into that space, right? When we are at those tables, I think about the fact that access to all of us is not, let me back up. I work for a nonprofit in education equity, right? And a lot of my work is to ensure that we create access for education to Title I schools for demographics that a system is built against. That alone tells you the pressure that is walking into being a woman of color to go fight for the rights that should be accessible to all because education be accessible to all, right? But then let's talk about lateral aggression as education becomes accessible to some but not all, and then they're part of the same demographic. Now you're sitting here and we're fighting each other or have the sense to fight each other because access wasn't provided to all of us in the same concept, right? So now I think of my own personal experience where I do have a doctorate degree. It did not come easy, but when I think about my siblings and I think about the access that my siblings didn't have or family members that didn't have, they think of me differently because I'm educated versus someone who's not educated. So I'm at the table with my own family and I'm still being aggressed within my family because of access that I had to fight for, right? And there are many circumstances that come with it. So when we think about the tables, when we think about how we show up, it's really hard to say, how do we show up for each other and why do we feel like there's a struggle in lifting each other? Well, because again, I love Dr. Nadia's component of we're having discussions and bringing the colonizer in. And to me, it's a little bit challenging not to bring a systemic oppressive system that was created outside of me, right? It was created outside of those folks that do not look like the oppressor. But it is challenging when it has been for years, right? It's a systemic issue that's been for years placed in your head. And even if you haven't forwardly experienced it, you've experienced it somehow and still can't figure out how to manifest, right? Or how to navigate or manipulate the situation. So for me, I mean, it's a struggle to say, how do you manage or why do we have it against each other when I have witnessed it within my own community where we have no other issue because some folks are threatened by the person that's being brought in because maybe they were bypassed for an opportunity. And that opportunity may be because of skill rather than look. But even as women, I challenge us as women and people of color to think about the opportunities that are presented sometimes to us and why they're presented to us, right? And why we have access to some things. And our counterpart, who may be from the same demographic, may look like a person, maybe perceived as a person of color, where they're not given that opportunity. And then how does that play out at the table that you're in? So I agree with everything everyone's saying. I mean, we can jump on a soapbox for hours and have a dissertation. I'm not planning to write a dissertation on this. So
I can tell you're still in the dissertation mode, though.
nope.
Nope. Okay. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to add, if I may, Nick, in regards to more specificity around what we're talking about with this lateral violence, because, like I said, some of the research that I use in my own workshops talks about lateral violence happens when people who are victims of dominance turn on each other rather than confront the system that is oppressing them, which is what we are talking about now, is the system that is oppressing them. But I wanted to give more specificity to really what that looks like, because it's bullying that takes place across this lateral aggression and lateral violence. Bullying such as social exclusion, okay? Not letting others in that are members of your own affinity. The gossiping that comes up about them to bring them down, okay? Ignoring them. Also the nonverbal intimidations. People read this stuff. I mean, it's not trivial when people see your reaction when someone else finishes when Dr. Luce does something very eloquently, and then another Afro-Latina has an entirely different reception, and it could be nonverbal. People are paying attention to that. And also, let's talk about the reality today that we have to add to this list of cyberbullying. It is something that's strong. We've seen it even that it could be something even fatal. So we have to pay attention to the use of that and other cyber platforms. And finally, of course, unfortunately, it does take place in physicality. There's also physical violence at times that people, without filters, just take after each other for whatever reason that we have all just brought up, be it color, be it education, be it where you're from, your national origin, be the position that you got that I didn't get or I'm trying to get, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Cal. And I welcome our other panelists to respond to this question after hearing what other panelists had to say. All right. So a question I have for you all is thinking about sort of leadership, both organizationally and socially and politically. What do leaders, what responsibility do they have when it comes to creating environments and communities that encourage cultures of positivity and collaboration and uplift rather than that of competition and conflict among people of color? I would love to start with Dr. Nadia.
So the responsibility of the organization and leadership, I would say that it's a huge responsibility, right? And I think that we kind of all know that, but I think that it's a huge responsibility because they kind of have an authorial voice in a sense. And I think that organizations and leadership need to, with that voice, with that power, need to create a space of multiplicity of consciousness, which then allows for, a level of, education or exploration or understanding or acceptance, right? When we think about the larger community as a whole, but also for those who are very layered, to be themselves at work and not have to experience, these lateral aggressions and lateral violence that we're talking about today, right? And so I think that work has to be intentional to kind of showcase and celebrate these layers, but also spearhead honest conversations, right? On identity, on who people are within the community or the workplace, and that of leadership. So I think that if this is properly done, I think that there's more reflexivity from an individual perspective to then want to contribute to a more dynamic, environment.
Thank you. Dr. Lutz, I'd love to hear from you on that point.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I think it also, taking it a step back, I also think it's important to see and understand if the leadership even comprehends what lateral aggression is and what is happening within our own communities, right? Because Again, I work for a nonprofit, and while the individuals who lead our nonprofit have served the community, they're not part of the demographic that we largely serve, right? So their perspective and knowledge and or experience is going to be different. Not knowledge, but definitely experience, because they're not part of that demographic. So I think not only do we have to be able to create spaces, but first we have to, very much like we started here, right? A very level ground foundational space where we understand and provide an opportunity to learn about lateral aggression. Because for some of our leadership, they may not understand where this is coming from, right? How many times can we reflect and think about, I remember when I was younger, or even one movie was when they were like, Remember the Titans. It's a great example. There's many of them, right? But in Remember the Titans, the two captains, one is black, one is white, are having a conversation and they get kicked out or something happens and someone gets loud, the group gets loud, and the white character says, well, you know how they are. And the black character turns around and says, what do you mean by they? Right? Like it starts having the discussion of they don't even understand the concept of some of the language, right? So if they don't understand the concept of some of the language, they most likely aren't going to understand the basics of this lateral aggression, this term, right? This internal turmoil that's happening within our own community. So I not only do we have to have the space for flexibility and reflection, but we also have to have the space for our leadership who may not understand it to say, I don't understand. I don't know. We can't hold organizations accountable if they don't know. I also have to say that if an organization or a leader says, I don't know, I would have to question where they have been over the last few years, right? But ultimately, providing that space is important, but also holding our leadership accountable starts with, do you even know that this is occurring? And I think that's where the conversation starts for me.
That's great. Melody, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so I think education, patience, grace, seeing the humanity in people's history, culture, and community. But there also needs to be that acknowledgement and accountability and active change from leadership. And if they don't know, then are they willing to put their money where their mouth is? Are they willing to divest or invest in this, because it is important. It is part of the work culture. And I think somebody said it in one of the previous sessions, but you need to reclaim your ignorance. It can't be your crutch. You can't just say, I don't know, I'm not a part of this community. But we can't stop there. And leadership, they are in that place to take care of their people. So I want to see that happen.
Yeah, one of the scariest things is to Liz's point, is to see people in leadership roles who have not done their due diligence to do their own self-awareness and enhance their own cultural competence around this. And unfortunately, I've seen that happen more so with politicians. Once again, we started out with someone who was elected into a position for numerous constituents. And you could see that operating from her own biases and lateral aggression. So the responsibility is the self-assessment of understanding that just because I've got the bigger office or I've gotten the title, that it doesn't mean that I do know what's best for all. It was also discussed in the previous group about making sure that you are hearing the voices and not assuming what they need. But I think with this point of the education of lateral aggression, it's coupled with so many other things around education, right? And the openness of people to do that. I could go into critical race theory. I could go into the concept of whiteness. I could go into all those various concepts that we know what they mean, but people are co-opting them, politicizing them. And we've got to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, even within our own groups, right? To make sure that we understand what we're up against. And just to kind of take us on another track is, I love this panel and the diversity of this panel. And we know that when we talk about minimalized groups or minority, historically, there are those that may not be as considered that way historically. I just rolled off of the Florida Holocaust Museum board of directors, and there are people doing phenomenal work, right? And attempting to, they've got me on the board and other is a very diverse board, but I could still see in the conversations that we're having, the understanding of the relationship between the Jewish community and the African American community is a dialogue that is still very difficult for them to have. Or the relationship between the Asian community, be it API or be it, East India or wherever, for that, the conversation with the African American community or the Hispanic community is still difficult and has not happened and is still simmering below all this discussion around lateral aggression.
Cal, if I can just jump in. You see, now you done started. Now we're all going to jump in and we're not going to follow the script here. Well, there's no script, but the timeline. But I'm glad you bring that up because it ties into the whole conversation of like, what can we do as communities, right, of color that are being oppressed? And the first thing, like, it sounds so simple, but you brought it up. Bringing people to the table that we do not think are part of our communities, but are, right? We think about the backlash that over the last few, there have been many backlashes, but over the last few weeks, I don't know if he's Kanye or if he's the artist formerly known as Kanye or Yeezy or what his name is as of now, right? But if we think about the backlash that he had because of his anti-Semitic statements, right? If we think about just that overall, and there are so many things we can unpack there, but when we talk about how we can come together to start having these discussions and hold other people accountable, we first have to come to the table and sit down and have the discussions to understand each other where we are at, right? And also the conversation between white LGBTQ and non-white LGBTQ and BIPOC. I see that on the chat. We just really, I'm glad you brought up the fact that there are communities that are oppressed, right, that are often left unseen or not acknowledged because they don't fall into this particular space of color, right? And we need to start having the discussion that racism does exist and it exists against Black and Brown people, right? But there is oppressive behavior that happens against our Jewish, Southeast, East Asian, all of the demographic that doesn't fall into the quote unquote majority. And if we can first, like before we talk about how we hold our leadership accountable, if we can't come together, right? There's always that discussion on how can this group get this movement going, but we've been fighting for years. Well, because we're not having the discussion. We're not at the table. And if we're at the table, we're being selective with who is at the table. So let's have the discussion first so that then when we come correct to our leadership, we know what we're doing, we know what we're saying together. Now, that's not to say that my experience as an Afro-Latina, I sometimes even feel uncomfortable in acknowledging myself as an Afro-Latina because I've had people tell me, you're not Black, right? Because I'm saying I'm Afro-Latina, right? Like, I would never take the space of what I'm making a full assumption that Dr. Nadia is, right? I will never take that space because if we walked in the room together, they're not gonna pick me as a Black woman. But you can't tell me and choose my identity for me, right? And I am still receiving a level of oppression by you questioning my own identity, right? So, and that happens within our own group. So when we talk about this, bring the people to the table, but let's not be selective. And let's try to I want to say this carefully, but I don't know what other way to say it in saying bringing your experience is important. Because I will never understand what it is to be a Black man. I will never understand what it is to be a Black woman. I will never understand what it is to be an Asian, right? But it's important for us to come to the table to listen, to then figure out how do we understand each other and resolve the problem together, to then advance the cause. And I think when you brought that up, Cal, it's important because some people will turn on the website and be like, well, why is there a Black man on the Jewish? And first of all, anyone can be Jewish if they want to, right? But at the end of the day, that's an important point of the conversation. I'm sorry, I just had to jump on myself up. I'll give it back to you, Nick.
No, please don't apologize. I think all of these are important points, and even the emotionality that comes up for us as panelists is important for others to hear. So no need to apologize for that. I thank you for for jumping in and adding those points. While the question is still on the table, Melody, I would love to hear your thoughts.
The third question.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I
In
think
response to, you know, everything that's now come up.
yeah, okay. So I feel like, you know, we live in a society where and I heard this term, it was very intriguing. It's called Oppression Olympics. This idea of Oppression Olympics needs to stop. Who wants to win Oppression Olympics? I don't want to live Oppression Olympics. But what we need to start doing is bringing people to the table, hearing experiences, acknowledging their lived experiences, and even the the historical context of people groups. And just because we acknowledge and accept one people group here does not negate mine over here. And I think that's really hard for us. And going back to a couple questions ago, where there is a quota, there is a limited space, limited time slot where we can speak about these issues. Can I share about my issues, or, you know, what are we trying to do? And so I think that is something that we need to know is just because this one experience exists doesn't invalidate the others. Because if we look historically, there's so many parallels between our communities, and I'm specifically talking about Asian community and Black community. And it's about learning, because I grew up and I didn't know, these conversations didn't happen, and I'm in my 30s and I'm still learning. And I'm proud to say that there were evidence of solidarity and coalition that happened, but we don't focus our attention on that. What we focus our attention on are more of the division, but it was done before us. So we can look back in the past and see what they did and do it better, do it right, move forward. But if we're not sitting at the table, if we're not having the conversation, if I don't know what Dr. Luce has gone through and she doesn't know what I've gone through, and we can't speak in terms of that, and then where can we go? So I think that is so important, is we need to have that space, have the conversation, and, you know, not just in all identities, and how we want to be in terms of a progressive society.
Thank you. Dr. Nadia, I welcome you to add any additional thoughts if you have them.
Yeah, I really agreed with what everyone was saying. Back to a point I made earlier and points that were just recently made, like as different communities, right? Finding like the similarities, because I think that we do have a lot in common, more than we think. And then I can't stress enough, like instead of like badgering each other for our differences, or like you're different, I'm gonna come over here, you're not like us, like how can we figure out a way to celebrate those differences, right? Embrace that, to be like, oh, that's different, how can I learn from that, or come from that. And at the same time, Dr. Luce said this earlier, like recognizing our experiences. And I think that is so, I think we don't really understand how packed that is, our experiences, from our lived experiences to our privileges to just anything that we have been through, like recognizing that before coming into, you know, the conversation, recognizing that throughout the conversation, and just how we're relating to each other, right? And then not only am I a scholar in the DEI space, I'm a creative, right? And so for me, it's very important as a creative to, when I'm creating a film or any piece of work, like I'm speaking to my people, right? Or I'm speaking to, communities of color, like I'm speaking to us. I'm not speaking to the colonizer. I'm not creating my work thinking about what they would agree with, what they would like, what would make them feel comfortable. No, I feel like if you like it, I've done my job. If you're pissed off, I've done my job. And I think that having more of that attitude, because I think sometimes we're scared to have that attitude because we may lose a job, or we may lose an opportunity, we may lose so much. I think that that's really what we have to start, embracing.
And Nadia, I use a similar type of approach. If we can take it back to the workplace, when I was the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leader over at Tech Data, a technology distributor, And we built those resource groups, right? We built employee resource groups. But the thing about it is that I said these resource groups cannot be exclusive. They are inclusive, right? So the thing about it is I wanted each of them, as they built their events, to say, to understand two things. One, to your point, Nadia, I don't care who's in the office, in the audience. I'm not going to change my message because of who's sitting in front of me. My message will still be authentically me, representing my affinity, right? And our affinity is so diverse, not a monolith. So when my Hispanic group goes up front and they talk about they didn't call it lateral aggression, but they were honest in talking about the relationship between Mexicanos, Cubanos versus Colombians and Venezuelans, right? And that's something that people needed to take advantage of, be aware of if they're in the workplace. That's team dynamics. And so if you're not a member of that affinity, you learn from hearing that from their voices. So it was important to understand, regardless of who's in front of you. We even had our African American or Black resource group to do a session called I Am Not My Hair. And so they gave truth about, I am tired of the majority asking me about my hair, touching my hair, trying to understand why it looked different Monday as it did Friday. So the realization of how that impacted their experience in the workplace, and how we, as we all know, we can go to another conversation about the tax that many minimalized people have to pay that others don't. But there was that understanding, and people walked away with it. But they did not filter it for a corporate message. They said, we're going to be authentically ourselves regardless who's in front of us. And we feel that they are going to be much more culturally competent at the end of it.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Cal. I've heard so much that brings me back to this idea of really becoming what I like to call operative allies, not just acknowledging that allyship is important, but knowing what work to do for yourself and for those around you to help them do the work for themselves, so that we can better understand each other and avoid concepts like oppression Olympics and really just being threats to each other as communities of color. And it does go beyond just communities of color, right? It goes to all of the cultural identifiers and affinity groups that we all hold dear to ourselves, and how we can learn from each other and create spaces where we can, frankly, just be productive citizens, and work together to improve some of the historical dynamics that exist in our society. I thank you all as panelists for being a part of this conversation, and for those of you in the audience as participants for allowing us to bring this concept to the table. And hopefully there are some takeaways that will be meaningful to you moving forward. So thank you, everyone. And I will hand it off to Eric.
Thanks a lot, Nick, Dr. Sasso, Cal, Dr. Luz, Melody. Appreciate your perspectives. Thank you so much for coming with it. And we are in the home stretch, folks. So I'm gonna save my closing remarks for a little bit and get to our illustration reveal. So Jonathan, it's on you, sir. If we could shift the spotlight to Jonathan and his reveal, please.
Can you unmute, John? Unmute your microphone. I'll go ahead and share your art, John.
You just muted yourself again, John. There you go.
There we go. Okay. I'm still in art mode here. Gee whiz. I need,
There you go.
okay. All right, so here it is. Basically, we played around with the ideas of division and the idea of going from division to thriving, and just taking in, you know, some of the conversation, some of the report outs. You know, we came up with this idea of kind of staying true to the overall concept and drawing this house that is divided. You know, this house is so divided that it's on fire, and, you know, having a national perspective that you know, is kind of fanning the flames of division here. And then we kind of go to the rooftop, and we see folks working together. We've got equity, we've got inclusion, we've got diversity highlighted. And, you know, in my mind, I thought, well, you know, equity is kind of that needle that will kind of sew things together and make things better, and inclusion being the thread that is woven through the two sections of the house, bringing it all together and allowing diversity to thrive. So that's the concept. And around that concept, we've got highlighted some of the panelists' discussions, some of the key words and key phrases there. So yeah, that's it.
As usual, absolutely stunning. You know, every time that the reveal happens, I just had to sit back and take it in like, wow, every single one of these have been absolutely incredible. Once again, Jonathan, you've outdone yourself par usual. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated with how you've pulled the perspectives together.
Thank you, sir.
All righty. So we are at the end of the work that we've been working through. So I want to say thank you all for the time that you spent with us. It's been absolutely amazing. We had a lot of heady topics, a lot of strong topics. You all stayed engaged the whole time. It's been absolutely an amazing day. I'm just having a moment right now, and I'm taking a point of personal privilege, is that this was powerful for me because there were people from every walk of my life, from my private boarding school to my elementary school, to my time in Cleveland, to my time at Duke, to my time in business school, to my time here in Florida. So it was amazing to see how now our first nationally oriented conference has come together. So I wasn't going to reveal this, but I am. And it's kind of the idea of when God says that, you know, I'm going to take people that are taking shots at you to harm you, and I'm going to take that and put it to your good. We're going to make them pay for what they've done to you. So throughout this process of having to delete these 100 comments, one of the things that kept coming up was the play on words instead of EDI or DEI of DIE. And so it usually takes me about, and Bianca gets very upset with me because it takes me about 3 months before we're supposed to actually pull this off for me to come up with the topic. Well, the haters gave me the topic. The next topic we're going to talk about, we're not going to do a traditional conference next year, is EDI versus DIE. And the idea of it, and this is going to be a call out or a call to action to the corporate community, specifically those in the CEO's Action for Diversity. What happened? What are you doing? If you want to celebrate, that's great. But what's going on? Are we at a point where diversity is dying again? Are we at a point where there's so much fatigue that we're now not going to have these conversations? Is it now because of not wanting to be on the wrong side of history in 2020? We created all of this activity, all of this work to say we're going to support communities of color. And then now 2 years later, we're not. We're going to be quiet. We're not going to show up. We're not going to do anything. So it's time to start having additional conversations and additional movement towards, you know, let's get back to action. We did from talking to doing. Well, you did a lot of talking in 2020. What are you going to do now to 2022, 2023, and 2024? So this is the place that we're headed. Thank you so much again for your time today. And I think it's time to and one more piece, the Debbie Fund. No, always, please, if you feel so inclined, please contribute to the Debbie Fund. That's how this conference was able to come together. It's also how the Tampa Bay Equity Incubator comes together. It's also how we continue to do this great work throughout the community that we're doing. It does cost, so please contribute to the Debbie Fund. It's pinellascf.org/Debbie Fund. We also have a survey that's in the chat, so please take the survey. We want to know your perspectives. What other topics can we be looking at? We may be looking at doing smaller versions of this throughout the year, just to continue some conversations. So please take the survey, let us know. Also, final shout out to our sponsors, Allegheny Franciscan Ministries, Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg, Pinellas Community Foundation, Tampa Bay Equity Incubator, City of St. Petersburg, Healthy Start, Juvenile Welfare Board, Frederick and Medical College of Wisconsin, our Tampa Bay Rays and Rowdies. Also, the St. Petersburg Free Clinic, and Maureen and Brian Butler from Vistra Communications. So thank you all again. Have a great rest of your week and weekend. Be safe out there. And we're going to let you go ahead and complete the survey. Thank you.
Recording stopped.